Chapter 91. Hee hee hee. I giggled as I woke up, blinking sleep out of my eyes and wiggling to escape the tickling I was receiving. Teeny. No F fair. I giggled as I reached down and pulled the noodle away from my belly, where he was tickling me. Dra. He giggled at my squirming as I pulled the blanket away and managed to get myself covered again so he couldn't reach my sides. Okay, I'm awake. Geez, none of you want to let me sleep in. I grumbled a bit as I reached out and cupped Dratini's face between my hands. Morning. I whispered to my little buddy as I leaned in and pressed forehead to forehead. Teeny. He whispered back, squeezing me in his coils for a moment in a hug before loosening. Our moment was broken when I yawned, unable to fight it back. I looked to my other sleeping buddy. Mimikyu was actually already up and across the room, standing on top of a pile of his supplies. He was making something new, and I'm sure it was gonna be cute. Morning, Mimikyu. I greeted, and he stopped what he was doing to look at me. Kukui. He greeted me warmly, and then went back to what he was doing. Good. I looked over at Dratini. Want to join me? I asked him, and he chirped happily as he wrapped around me. He was getting big, even with him coiled around my neck, he was still dangling quite a ways down. It was because he was growing, and not because I was short. I walked into the bathroom yawning still and readied my toothbrush. Dratini knew what toothpaste was so he didn't try to taste it. He'd only done that once. Giggling a bit at the memory, I stuck my toothbrush up to my face and then instead of just getting it over with, I waited a second until Dratini grew confused, and started dancing as I brushed. The happy giggles of delight filled the bathroom. Certainly made brushing my teeth more fun. Finishing up, I straightened up, brushed my hair and put it back in a ponytail. Thankfully it was starting to grow back a bit from Jibble's chomp. But when I headed downstairs, I noticed something that made me slump. It's snowing. I grumbled as I looked out the windows that were frosted. You like snow? Mama said as I looked over at the living room couch where Mama was curled up in blankets watching TV. Meowth was purring lightly under Mama's hands. I do. But doing chores in the snow sucks. Mama looked away from her shows and hummed in agreement. Your father is already out there doing some checks. If you hurry, I'm sure he'd be happy to see you. Mama offered leadingly, and I narrowed my eyes. What an odd thing to say. I kept my eyes narrowed at her as I headed for the hall closet and grabbed my jacket and snow boots. All the while, Mama watched me innocently until I walked out of sight towards the door. Get ready. I warned Dratini, who nodded at me seriously. And then I opened the door. That explains Mama's well-hidden amusement. A snow fort had been built, obviously at the hands of Papa. He stood upon the top of it, which told me that snow was packed up, and Arcanis had popped out beside him, and Lucario and Riolu stood beside him. Lucario had her arms crossed, mimicking Papa, which was really cute, but Riolu gave the game away as she held snowballs in her hands and looked far too eager to hit me with them. So it's like this. A betrayal. I shouted out, pointing. The Emperor hears not the cries of the peasants. Papa called back, and I gasped as that was a quote from a historical movie that Papa liked. He was totally into it. Dratini. Get ready. We won't fall to this tyranny. I called out and Papa's grin widened in delight. Lucario. Command the release. Papa called out and Lucario nodded and barked and Riolu howled in delight, and then started chucking snowballs rapid fire. Crap. I yelped as I started running to avoid the incredibly accurate and powerful snowballs. I took 2 hits before jumping behind some packed up snow. At least Papa had given me some cover even if he didn't even give me a chance to make my own fort. Jerk. Dratini. Use Twister. We're going to start counter-attacking. Teeny. He chirped happily and as I gathered a snowball I stood up. His Twister kept the fire of snowballs from slamming into me, and I waited for it to build up before cocking a hand back and firing. The Twister sucked my snowball right through it and Riolu's laughter died as she ate a snowball right in her mouth. Take that. Down with tyranny. I roared out at my victory. Then a moment later I yelped as a hole was blown through my defenses. I looked over and saw the large snowball that Lucario had just chucked. That's cheating. No such thing. If your meager defenses can't stand up to the Emperor. Wahahaha. Papa Evil laughed, and I was not having that. Only I got to evil laugh. Use water pulse on their fortifications. We need to weaken their defenses. I called out and Dratini cheered, peeking his head up, and in a burst the water pulse slammed into Papa's fort. Hey! No such thing as cheating. I called back, looking at the hole in his defenses, now covered in ice. It looked like someone had hit a stone wall with a cannon. This was cool. Continue bombardment. Full attack Captain Lucario. Riolu, continue offensive duties. Arcani, pinpoint it. I didn't have time to find out what Papa was planning as Dratini peeked and fired another water pulse, and Arcani sent back a short fireball that slammed into the attack and exploded, spewing steam which thanks to the cold turned into a powder in seconds. That. Do it again. I called out, because that was so cool. A few more explosions later and I was satisfied. Even if I was avoiding a barrage of snowballs. Alright, they think they have the advantage here. Dratini used Twister, gather up all the snow. I called out, and he cried out, his purple dragon energy swirling out and sucking up snow into a big pile between us. Papa not yet calling out anything to stop it. Now use Twister to shoot it up into the air so it lands on their heads. I roared and Papa actually flinched back at my command as Dratini started another Twister. It was aimed at the ground and then the energy twisted up into the sky and started sucking up the snow, and as it did it started basically snow blowing it right at Papa. Then a light burst into life and a moment later the pile of snow had a hole through it, and the Twister was disrupted as Lucario's aura sphere simply smashed it all apart. I gaped, head exposed, which was a bad idea as a moment later I took a snowball from Riolu, always ready to be a brat. I think we need to call in reinforcements. I muttered to Dratini from the pile of snow I was in after getting tagged. Teeny. He muttered in agreement, huddling down in my jacket. If only I had Dragonite with me. But Papa had made a mistake. I put my fingers in my mouth, hesitated, and then made sure Dratini's ears were covered, and then I whistled. The entire battlefield went silent for a moment, and then the pond rippled and the many heads of the Hydra appeared. Milotic. The evil Emperor is oppressing us. Rise up. Use Twister. Throw the snow at him. I called out laughing, and for a moment there was silence. Papa's jaw dropped. Vicky, that's too dash. But it was too late, the Milotic of course had been watching, and they started giggling happily, and a moment later, Twister after Twister fired up and the snow was scooped up copying Dratini, and Papa yelped as he ducked down to hide behind Arcani. Lucario and Riolu both did the same as the Snowpocalypse descended upon them. I laughed evilly as Papa's fort was swamped in a tide of snow. Whoever evil laughs last, wins. And then it exploded. I stumbled back, falling into the snow as Arcani lit up, and the snow was swept away with a fire spin. Ha ha ha. The power of snow is no match for the Emperor's supreme might. Papa roared out and I huffed at the audacity. Since he was distracted, I grabbed a snowball and threw it. It slammed right into his face. A moment later, his eyes narrowed and he bent down to grab some snow and chucked it back, and the game was once more on. Calling out a Garridos breaks the rules. Papa told me as we both sat on the couch with towels around us, warming us up. You cheated first. Arcani is absolutely out of bounds. Not even talking about Lucario. She wanted to help. He sidestepped the issue, and I noticed she didn't say anything about Arcani. Besides, Blue Heart just wanted to play. Vicky. He was harmless. He didn't even hurt Lucario. I pointed out, and despite everything Papa did have to accept that with a nod. Really you too? I expected some winter fun, not a reenactment of the Shogun defying the Emperor. Mama said as she put her hands on her hips, looking over us. I was actually King Barth dash. Victor. Mama cut him off bluntly. I love you, but that wasn't a request for information. I expect that window to get fixed. We both winced. At least this wasn't technically my fault. Lucario is the one that threw the snowball at Blue Heart, who dodged it a bit and it hit the house, breaking a window. Blue Heart's attack of scooping up snow with his mouth and dropping it on his enemies had been Perfection. Fish saliva still smelled, and so it was a double whammy. I was not the only one that suffered. All right, my dearest and most beautiful wife. I'll head to the store and get the window fixed. Good. Vicky. Stay out of trouble for the rest of the day. Mama demanded, and I instantly gave her a military salute. Rolling her eyes, she leaned down and gave Papa a kiss. A kiss to the conquering hero. She whispered, and Papa looked oh so pleased. He didn't win. I muttered petulantly, but Mama just ran a hand through my hair as she walked out of the living room. Want to help me get the stuff for the window? Papa asked, and I nodded, standing up as we raced for the car. A few days later, I'd jumped onto Dragonite back and flown up and over the Silver Mountains. I'd kept in contact with Bugsy, usually just short phone calls, but he'd mentioned that with the snow there were some issues, and I'd offered to come help. Mostly because I wanted to play with the sleepy bugs. I landed in Azalea just outside the gym, and Bugsy was already waiting. Vicky. It's good to see you. He said, smiling happily, and I waved happily as I slipped off. Me too. Come on, I want to see the sleepy babies. Well, they aren't babies. None of the colonies are making eggs around this time, because it's winter. Bugsy, all cute Pokémon are babies. I told him, and he took this in for a second, before nodding with a smile. It's this way. Just try to stay quiet, we don't want to wake them up. That'll disrupt their hibernation. Got it. I agreed, and we both stomped out into the forest, leading me to a cave, where already there was a lot of stuff left out half covered in snow. Bugsy ran over and picked up a bag and wiped it down, before opening it and pulling out netting. But not. It's a wind cover for the cave entrance. It'll help the colony retain heat during the winter. It's step 1. He explained very quietly, and I nodded. Together we strung up the netting over the front of the cave. There were already little hooks embedded into the rock, thankfully, so all we did was hang it up. As we finished, Bugsy looked delighted at the work and waved for me to follow him inside. The cave was dark, and Bugsy used just a tiny little flashlight that barely gave off any light, but it was just enough for us to slowly and quietly walk inside. There along the back wall was an entire beedrill nest. Hundreds of them pressed together. Every once in a while, they'd buzz their wings, and I could practically feel the heat coming off the swarm. Bugsy turned back and made sure to hold a finger to his lips. I nodded, and then we walked forward slowly, carefully checking out footing as we approached. Bugsy had another backpack that he opened when he got close, and I noticed it was berries. No, it was actually more like jam, just a big jar full of sweet food. That was when I noticed a few of the beedrill were still moving around fully, if slowly. They wandered around the hive giving food to those that were just resting to keep the hive warm. They wandered down, and noticed Bugsy. They beat their wings at him, but it wasn't a threat. Instead they wandered down, and one even climbed onto his shoulder. I watched in delight as he took care of his friends. They ate the jam and then helped spread that to the rest of the hive, and as they moved I could see what was happening. Below the beedrill, hiding under them, were Kakuna, dozens if not hundreds of them, all kept warm and safe by the hive. I could even see a few Weedle sleeping among the Kakuna, but there weren't many of those. Bugsy handed out the jam. Soon he was satisfied, and we both walked out of the cave and back into the much colder outside air. Thanks. Bugsy whispered, and I threw him a thumbs up. No problem. Where to next? There's a family of Heracross I want to check on. We both headed out into the forest. Even with the snow, Bugsy knew the forest like the back of his hand, so we didn't get lost, and my help carrying extra food for the Pokémon ended up making me useful on the trip. Not that seeing all the cute hibernating bug Pokémon wasn't worth the trip anyways. Vicky. Yeah? I asked, looking up from my Pokédex. I was adding some information on the bug Pokémon that I'd discovered, thanks to Bugsy. Beedrill were cuddle bugs when it was cold. Good information that. Professor Seras just called. He mentioned a research expedition. Mama said as she walked into my room, and I perked up. Oh yeah? Is he finally ready? He asked if you would be open in a few days to traveling with the expedition to MT Moon for a few days. Yes. Can I go? We're doing EV research. Mama blinked at that, and actually whatever she was going to say was forgotten. On MT Moon? Yeah. They have some correlation data. Multiple Espion and Umbreon all evolve at a similar place on the mountain. I explained and Mama perked up. Oh, how nice. I wonder if they'll finally figure it out. She muttered happily and I hummed a bit. I don't think it has anything to do with the mountain itself. It doesn't really fit, but I'll do my best to help them figure it out. I offered confidently, and Mama sent me a smirk. Oh, is my poke genius daughter going to solve the mystery of evolution? Yes. I said simply and very pointedly closed my Pokédex journal. That's why I wanted to help Seras in the first place. Not Eevee specifically, but all of them. All Pokémon should be allowed to evolve, and the knowledge lets us help them. You know. I know you never liked the Milotic situation. Keeping it quiet. Are you okay? Mama asked and I blinked and decided to be honest. I really hate it. I mean, I like the money. I had to admit. It let me do lots of things to help take care of my Pokémon, but I'd be happier to see a trainer walking around with a Milotic or an Arcanine. Mama huffed a laugh at me. You're just like your father. You love your mangy mutts. Hey. Arcanine and Arcanine aren't mangy. Mama poked me and I giggled at her ticklish finger. You know what I mean. I hope working with this professor helps Vicky. I didn't really want to allow it. I'd rather you go back to school instead, but maybe you need this. Maybe you need to help share some of that understanding you have with Pokémon with the world. Our eyes met and I couldn't help but smile. I'm gonna try. I know. Mama bent down and kissed my forehead. You have our permission to go with Professor Seras. It's not like there's anything on MT Moon that can threaten my conference winner. You definitely just jinxed me. I told her, and she laughed and hugged me tight. This is much better than I could have hoped. Professor Seras muttered as I helped out. We were at the base of MT Moon, and it hadn't taken long to confirm the spot that the expedition planned to camp, but instead of just heading through the mountain, which was a pain in the butt, we were instead relying on Dragonite and Arcanine to get everyone up the mountain the fast way. Dragonite carrying the equipment, and Arcanine carrying the people. Considering how much fun she was having running up and down a mountain was a reward for her, and a punishment for the poor researchers. The next one up the mountain shrieked as Arcanine disappeared. Thank you, Vicky. It's nothing. It keeps Arcanine busy. She likes the exercise. I explained and he nodded. Pretty quickly all the supplies, and the team of researchers were sent up the mountain. I liked Cerez's whoop of delight as he got to ride Arcanine up before me. Then I joined them and mostly just stayed out of the way as the camp was set up. Just a tent with some tables and things to place their equipment on, although I did scour the area for Geodude and sent 2 of them packing down the mountain after they got upset at my presence. Once that was done, I took in the actual location. Cave on one side. Cave on the other. It was on the descent to Cerulean where the path opened up and you could see out of the mountain. I could make out Cerulean from here even. I scoped out the area, noticing plenty of marks of old campfires and things. Lot of people camped here. Alright people. Let's start taking those scans. Ceres called out, leading the group. It was mostly people I was familiar with. Ren and Krysa, Ceres's research assistants. Although Ren had a Magnemite following him around and even holding some of the equipment while Ren worked. Very cute. For some reason, Krysa, despite loving Psyduck, didn't seem to actually have one. If you like the Pokémon, why not go find one? And then there were the Eevee researchers. Pinery with her Glacian haircut, did have an Eevee that was following her around, and 2 others, one girl with a lightning streak in her bangs had a Jolteon. Bit on the nose, but I couldn't really comment. It turns out that finding a hairdresser that can do Pokémon styles is easy, but finding one that can do the style you want is a bit harder, so I ended up giving up on the idea. I walked around the camp checking on things. Arcanine was assigned to one of the cave entrances, and Dragonite and Milotic to the other. That made sure the Zubat wouldn't cause us any issues. Thankfully it was quiet. The researchers ran around like headless chickens taking samples of the dirt, and checking the rocks all over the place to see if any of them had some hidden evolution stones. We were gonna be here for a few days, so I had time to try and figure out how to lead the researchers to water. Until then, I settled in along the edge of the path and just enjoyed the view. Chapter 92. I poked the fire with a stick, watching as it crackled. It was getting really cold, but between setting up a campfire and Arcanine acting as my space heater, I was fine. Not that the rest of the researchers weren't still complaining of the cold. Should have brought Pillow with me, could have offered him out to someone as a space heater. I suppose I could just go grab him. I snorted at the thought. No way. It's too cold for me to want to get up and fly or run across Kanto tonight. Settling in? Yep. I told Professor Seras as he stopped a minute to warm up at my fire. Anything yet? I asked, already expecting the answer. Nothing yet. Research takes time, he assured me, and I just nodded, making sure he didn't think I was getting bored or something. I was mostly treating the whole thing as a quiet camping trip. Good, maybe we'll find some other factor. Atmospheric? He mumbled. Can I see the data for the evolutions we have? I asked, and he blinked and nodded. Sure, you're here helping, so you have the right. Who knows, fresh eyes might see something we don't. I smiled back at his response, and once he got up and wandered off, I sighed a bit as I leaned back and stared into the starry sky. I wanted to just say it, but I had no way to prove it, and that could end up with the whole thing just ignored. Friendship evolutions. That was a complicated thing to prove. I had some evidence to back me up with Blissey, but how do I convince a bunch of researchers that? I guess. Act like a scientist. Gather data points that prove my hypothesis, and bring enough that they start considering it. Not long later, Cerise returned and handed over a printout. Just don't lose that, he said as I grabbed it from him and nodded. Right there on the front was the pages for everything, so I flipped the page to the first evolution data point. Espion evolution. Young trainer. Had the EV for years. Which is a good thing to note. Friendships can take time. He evolved his Pokémon on MT Moon. There was a blurb for a direct interview, but it just was confirming where it happened, which was here. Hey, Professor? Yes? What time did this evolution happen? This has a lot of location stuff, but nothing about time of day for when it happened. There, let's see if that clue could help. He reached over from where he had taken a seat on a camp chair that had been brought to the top, and I handed the research notes back to him. Time of day. I don't think we gather that. Pinery. Cerise called out as he rose up and hurried to the research tent that was still lit up as the crew ran around despite the late hour and cold. Alright, Arcanine. I think we should be nice. Want to come sit by the tent and keep it warm? I asked her, rubbing at her belly fur, and she rumbled before starting to rise. We walked over and Arcanine slipped her head inside the tent as she lay back down, and just with that, I could feel a bit of the chill inside start getting fought off. Pinery was talking to Cerise, but Chrysa looked up and blinked and then smiled warmly at me, and mouthed a thank you. I nodded and joined Cerise. Time of day? Is that relevant? It could be. Cerise said excited and Pinery nodded, going to her laptop. I don't think it ever came up, let me rewatch the interviews. Maybe one of them mentioned it? She asked, and started doing just that. Cerise and I both gathered around, and as we started through a few recorded interviews, the crew noticed the warmth and looked up, slowly. Cerise gave me a real honest smile and a pat on the shoulder before we both focused on the laptop. Finally we got a clue. So I'd just come up the mountain, it was really awful, I was only going to go in for a few hours, but I got lost, and I was in there all night. I know it was all night because when I finally found the exit path and I hit that open spot, you know, the one where the cave opens up and you can see Cerulean? That was. The sun was coming up, so I took a break, just Evie and I. We were both really battered, I was out of potion. But we did it. Us. The kid in the interview, brightly. Evie and I just looked at each other and. He evolved. The three of us took that in. Sunrise? Is that? Could that be it? Check the Umbreon interview. I called out, before the two could get distracted. What? Umbreon and Espeon. They both evolved here. So whatever time it evolved would give us a clearer picture. I don't have a video interview for her. I don't know what time it was. Pinery muttered, and Seras hummed. It's a clue. Thank you, Vicky. That. Day and night. I offered, they had some of the clues, so I'd offer my own confirmation. I'd bet money it was day and night. Umbreon and Espeon. They represent day and night. There's no data that the two evolutions have a connection other than both being from an EV. Seras reminded me, but I shook it off. I had my own suspicions before, and I think I'm right. I told him. I shrugged. Both Pokémon are friendship evolutions. And are skewed between when they evolve. Day or night. I explained, trying to say it in a way that they might accept. Friendship evolution? Pinery asked, and even Seras looked confused. Ugh. I know you won't believe me, but I know it exists. Blissey is a friendship evolution. I explained, and despite both adults looking at me skeptically, I decided I wasn't going to stay silent this time. Friendship is an evolution factor. I know. I tested it with Blissey. She couldn't evolve for a long time despite how strong she was, because our relationship was more acting as my caretaker. I explained, and the two both reacted differently. Pinery didn't look convinced, but Seras actually closed his eyes and considered it. I've heard a lot of theories in regards to evolution, but this is the first I've heard of friendship being a factor. Why not? Bonds are a real thing. Trainers that have a strong bond with their Pokémon have stronger Pokémon. It's one of the reasons my friends are so strong. So why shouldn't it impact some Pokémon's evolution? I looked to Arcanine, who, while laying down, noticed my attention, and I could hear her tail thumping outside. Interesting. Seras whispered, and I nodded. I bet you have trouble evolving Eevee into Espeon or Umbreon in lab conditions, right? I asked, looking at Pinery, who blinked in surprise as I suddenly turned things around on her. Well, yes. It's difficult. It's because you need more than just training or a stone to evolve some Pokémon. You need to become their friend. That bond empowers them and they can then evolve. I stopped because. Yeah. That was all I had to share. Heh. Our new research fellow is opinionated about their hypothesis, huh? Ren called out, and that broke the tension, and Crisis started giggling. I'm fairly confident. Yeah, that's pretty normal. Don't bring up Crisis' theorem of dash. I have evidence for that. The blue-haired researcher snapped, standing up, with a fist raised, like she was ready to go at it. Sure. Ren repeated, hands raised in surrender. Suddenly, a hand fell on my shoulder. You might be right. You might be wrong, but it's our job not to just say what is right, but to prove it. Science is more than just having the right answer. It's about finding out why that answer is right. Seras offered me, and I blew out a breath. Dang it. This is why I didn't want to just say it. Friendship as an evolution method. Interesting. Any other Pokémon that evolve in this way? Pinery asked me. Chansey into Blissey. And Riolu into Lucario, although baby Pokémon evolve through friendship much easier. I think familial bonds also work for them. I started counting off my finger. Golbat into Crobat. I was stopped as Seras nodded. Vicky, I think this is the perfect time to go over submitting a research paper. Seras offered, and his smile was nice and gentle, but the lanterns lighting the tent made his glasses glint out, and that smile suddenly looked more sinister. Good luck. Ren offered, and I could hear his honest worry, and I looked from him back at Seras, and he dropped a heavy hand onto my shoulder. Oh no. I whispered, but that was ignored as I was settled into a cold seat, and given a laptop to start typing out an official research paper about my exploration of friendship evolutions. I didn't want to be a researcher. That part is wrong. Seras offered to me, not unkindly, but considering it wasn't the first time. I just thunked my head against the table. That's not going to get your theory confirmed. he said to me, and I just groaned. I suddenly didn't want to confirm my theory, let the Pokemon world burn. Hail Giratina. I sighed, no, Giratina was a good boy. I'm taking a break. No wait, I'm going to sleep. I decided remembering how late it was, and Seras just chuckled and patted my shoulder as I trudged out of the tent. Arcanine was still keeping the researchers warm, which meant my tent would be cooler, but at least the fire was still going. I threw on some more sticks I'd collected and was about to settle in when I heard it. Battle. Arcanine. I called out as I rose up and faced the cave that led from Pewter. A moment later Arcane was at my shoulder head hanging over me and ready. Whoa. What was that? What's going on? Pinery called out and the other right behind her as she headed out of the tent, but then they heard it. I waited, the sounds of battle continued until finally it grew closer and closer and then, wow. Did this kid pick a fight with every Zubat in the cave? A kid was running breathlessly, a Raichu following after him, sending rather weak thunder shocks backwards to keep the Zubat off them both. The boy skidded to a halt, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of Arcanine hunched up and ready for battle. Raichu took a moment longer to notice as it bumped into its trainer and turned around, and then both of them stopped. Arcanine. Go. Play. I ordered pointed past the kid, not that he would see that, and he yelped and raised his hands to try and defend himself, but in a blink Arcanine was gone, leaping fully over Raichu and trainer and with a howl bursting into fire, lighting up the tunnel. She'd slobber over the Zubats for a while until they gave up. I looked at the trainer that looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Hi. We're doing a research camp here. So you're welcome to take a seat if you need to catch your breath. I offered as I headed back to my tent and grabbed my bag. I was gonna bring some ether and release Blissey, but when I got back I stopped. The boy had taken a seat next to the ledge and was staring out into the open sky, his Raichu beside him and both of them. I turned around and headed into the research tent and grabbed something that I probably shouldn't. It took a second despite Cerise and the others questioning me quietly, to get it right, and then I clicked the button. The camera clicked, snapping shut on the look between trainer and Pokemon as they slumped into each other after an arduous ordeal. Vicky? There. I told him, pointing at the boy. That's why you have so many Espeon and Umbreon evolving here. Imagine that Raichu was an EV, and tell me that isn't friendship. I told the older man as I handed him the camera. There was a look on his face, as if he was taking in the data and processing it. All right. I'm going to go play Nurse Joy. I decided and turned around, releasing Blissey and pulling out an ether from my bag. Hey, you both okay? Let's get you checked over, okay? I offered, sort of startling the boy, but when Blissey walked over and started healing him and his Pokemon, he relaxed with a relieved smile. Thank you. No problem. What happened in there? I questioned, mostly to keep him calm as Blissey took care of healing them up. I got lost, he admitted after a while. I was exploring for fossils, and I ended up getting lost down a side tunnel. Zappy kept the Zubat off me, but well, I ran into a bunch of Geodude and a Graveler. It was a tough battle, and Zappy was low on energy when we were all done. I tried to sit tight to give him time to rest, but the Zubat kept swarming us. I ended up having to run. Yikes. It was all I could really offer. What a run of bad luck. About then Arcanine came back, slobbering around a Zubat that was still in her mouth. Arcanine. Drop it, I demanded, and her ears tiled and she hit me with the big sparkly eyes as she patted her feet on the earth. No. You aren't keeping a Zubat as a chew toy. Drop it, I demanded, and finally she whined but opened her mouth. The poor Zubat was knocked out, completely sliding out of her mouth, covered in slobber, and just splatting against the ground. Whoa. Geez, Arcanine, I said as I got up, and even Blissey headed over to check on the poor thing. Arc. She defended herself and looked at me pointedly. I meant light play, not chew toy. Don't think I don't remember what happened with my Pidgey plush, I told her, with narrowed eyes. A moment later, her attitude shifted and she would have been whistling if she could. Yeah, play innocent all you want. I grumbled at her, as I walked up and started petting her. She had done a good job sending the Zubat packing after all. After a bit of reward attention, I sent her off to keep the fire going as Blissey had finished checking on the Zubat, and the Raichu and everything was calming down. Hey, if you want, feel free to pitch your tent near Arcanine. She'll keep the area warm. Oh. Thanks. He said quietly, looking at Arcanine like she was. Well, an Arcanine. Okay, fair. I headed into my tent though. It was late, and I was getting sleepy. A few days of just hanging around on top of the mountain and I was ready for this to be over. I'd even finished up the research paper on friendship evolutions, and submitted it to Seras to look over, not that he hadn't helped me write the damn thing, but still. Alright. Everyone. I want to thank you all so much for your time, but I think we've gotten everything we can. Let's head home. Seras called out and everyone cheered, even I did, thankful that this adventure was over. Okay, it wasn't too bad, just cold. It was still right in the middle of winter, and a big Arcanine can only do so much when I shared her among the group to help keep everyone warm. They'd done a good job planning this, but even the electric heaters and things they'd all brought hadn't really been enough. At least in my opinion. I was pretty happy as well. My hypothesis had been the only one that anyone had come up with to explain the evolutions here. Considering after Abbott the Raichu boy, we'd had a few other random trainers come up here in similar states, all of them looking up at the day or night sky in relief. To be out of a cave meant I had plenty of people to take pictures of, basically all doing the same thing. I helped pack up, although I left the expensive equipment to the researchers, and with Dragonite and Arcanine within just a few hours everyone was down at the bottom of the mountain, ready to head to where they'd parked a few trucks to carry all the equipment. Just as everything was packed up, Seras looked at me. Thank you, Vicky. Your help sped things up, and kept us from having to deal with Pokémon attacks. Which was actually a nice change of pace. It was. I won't call it a pleasure, but it was interesting. I decided, and Seras laughed at my description. That's research for you. A whole lot of waiting around or looking at data, hoping to find the magic bullet seed. Keep searching for evidence of your own hypothesis. Gather the data, and submit it. Who knows, maybe you'll convince us all someday. He offered with a wink, and I just scoffed. Just you wait until I tell you how to evolve EV into Glaceon and Leafeon, and that turns out to be true too. I said, returning his wink, and then I turned to go jump onto Dragonite. I didn't have an EV myself, and I wasn't really planning on going hunting one down, but there had to be some evidence out there I could find to prove it. Frustration? No, that had similar issues, where you can't really easily math out how much of a friend a Pokémon was. What I needed was an old source? The idea had merit, and he had offered for me to visit, but first time to head home. I'm home. I called out as I rushed inside. Ah. It was warm. Vicky. Mama called out, coming out of the living room and scooping me into a hug. Mama. I'm so glad to be home. It wasn't too bad? Tell me everything. She asked as she pulled away and ran a hand over my hair. Not terrible, not great. I'll do it again, but I'll bring more Growlithe if it's winter. I decided, and that made me know what I really wanted. Can I tell you after I take a hot bath? Mama laughed and pushed me towards the bathroom, which I rushed for. A warm bath is everything I wanted. Not long after I slipped in, and sighed into the warm water. I opened my eyes as the door opened and blew bubbles because I was not cleaning up a bunch of not Growlithe today. But it wasn't. Instead, it was Lucario who came in with a grumpy Riolu that had a bunch of wet fur and mud spots on her. Hee hee hee. I laughed at her put-out look as Lucario was not letting her escape. Hearing my laugh, she turned and glared, and I just ignored her whining as Lucario wasn't interested. Soon enough, she and Lucario were cleaned off and slipping into the tub. Despite the fact we were both here, Riolu and I both just sank into the warmth with a sigh and quietly enjoyed the peace. Lucario slowly relaxed as we didn't start fighting like normal. I didn't have the energy, and Riolu was actually enjoying the water as well. Vicky, Lucario, did Riolu get into the mud again? Lu. She barked out, sighing, and Mama just laughed. I guess with all the snow melt, the ground outside was muddy. I don't know how she was getting muddy, considering how frozen everything was, but Riolu was a brat, so I don't doubt she'd find herself in a mud pit regardless. I called your father. He'll be home during his lunch, to see you. Shall we wait for your adventure story until he gets home? Mama asked me, and I smiled at the thought. That sounds perfect, I'll just soak until then. Pfft. That's a couple hours from now, Vicky, don't turn into a seal. Mama ordered, and I just grinned. Seal. Seal. I mimicked, and Mama sent me a look telling me off. And then we all packed up everything and I shuttled everyone down the mountain. It feels like cheating. Papa muttered as I explained the entire trip. You just say that because of the hard time you had in MT Moon. Mama teased, and Papa rose up. That's right. Back in my day, we sent children into MT Moon with just one Pokémon and let them get lost. It builds characters. Running screaming from a Zubat swarm builds character? I had to ask, and while Papa gave an overdone shiver, the way he spoke was entirely serious. Yes, it builds character. If you say so. Thankfully, I just leapt over MT Moon every time I've had to go near it. Wait. You never went into the caves? Papa asked, surprised. No way. I don't want to catch a Zubat or Geodude, so I just went around. That's. He thundered and then reached down to pat my head. Really smart. That's my daughter for you. Ugh. Mama whispered, rolling her eyes. That's a good point though. Have you done any cave exploration? Mama asked, and I shook my head. Nope. Unless you count the tunnel for Blaine's volcano gym, but that was a straight shot and some stairs. I don't. Ugh, as much as your father is right, you should go walk through MT Moon sometime, Vicky. Getting lost in a cave and figuring out how to find your way out is sort of important. Huh. Is that why the only footpath between Cerulean and Pewter is MT Moon? I could help but wonder, and both my parents did a sort of shrug nod. Not exactly, but that is a consideration. The traditionalists are big on making sure trainers know how to navigate. Huh. Maybe I should? Oh. Oh wait. I did that in Kitakami. I forgot. I explored the big mountain there. Yeah, I got lost and it sucked. Took a while to find an exit. Slime Mountain. I named it because hell if I knew what the actual name was. Oh good. Mama said primly. At least you have the experience then. Heh. That's our daughter goes on so many adventures she can't even remember them all. Papa teased and Mama looked pleased. Anyway. I'm probably going to head over to Blackthorne City sometime today or tomorrow. I want to talk to the elder. I'm hoping he might be able to confirm information on friendship evolutions so Seras will stop making me do actual research. Both of my parents blinked, and as always when I offered some adventure plan they looked at each other testing the idea against each other, before Mama sighed. Okay, but be careful. I know the elder was kind to you, but not all of the Blackthorne will feel the same. I know. I agreed. But that was something for later. It was warm inside, and I just wanted to be warm inside for a while. Chapter 93. The next morning, despite wanting to just stay inside where it was nice and warm, I ran around, gathered up a specific set of Pokémon, and then hit the stable to collect the others, and then flew all the way back across Kanto and a mountain range to once again get to experience the tight mountain banks and awesome paths leading to Blackthorne City. Dragonite without a second passenger, and knowing where we were going? Might have gone a bit fast. Other Dragonite yelped and stumbled off the ledges around the city as we sped past and max speed. My whoops of joy echoed off the mountain range as we just blew through the sometimes sharp turns. A few times I noticed trainers on Dragonite back start chasing after me, but, well, they were slow. I cackled as we left them so far in our dust that we burst up above Blackthorne City completely alone, and Dragonite did a few spins in the air as we ended our supersonic flight. Luckily, Dragonite could control the weather, so the sonic boom was light and just a small rumble behind us as we slowed down enough for it to catch up. Of course, our presence earned us the attention of nearly every dragon in the city. I could see them, some resting on the mountains around the city, or down below looking up at us. I grinned behind my goggles and just threw up a fist. Dragonite roared at a few of them that looked ready to start a fight, and to my amusement most of them settled down, even if a few rose up to accept that challenge. But once again a rumbling roar echoed out and everyone settled down. The Elder's dragon told everyone to stop causing issues, and they did. I grinned as I urged Dragonite on, and we hurried over towards the Blackthorne gym, which I noticed was already finished reconstruction. I wonder if I should challenge Claire again and blow it up. You know. As a joke. No, I was here to ask for information, and to show off my buddies. I'll try to avoid picking any fights. Any more fights. We didn't head directly for the arena, instead as we flew over it, we saw a rather large fancy home. There I could see ALD, the Elder, resting out on a terrace. Claire was there as well, her stance already up and glaring, but I flew over and Dragonite landed next to the Elder's Dragonite. Both of them looked at each other and my girl gave a nod of respect to the much older Dragonite. My eyes, though, were locked on another guest. Lance. I called out, finger pointing, and he took a second to sip his nasty leaf water and then greeted me. Vicky. What are you doing here? I asked, and he waited a second, sipping his tea. I live here. That's fair. I agreed, and instead of arguing further, I turned to the Elder and offered a respectful bow. Probably. I didn't know how deep to go and whatever. Elder. Victoria. You're doing well? Yes. I agreed happily, as he seemed okay with a more casual atmosphere. I came here to speak to you, if you have the time? I do. Join us? Sure. I don't need any tea though. I don't like leaf water. I informed him as I sat, and that stopped Claire as she was about to fill out a cup for me. It's rude not to accept. She growled at me, and I just scoffed. It's more rude to offer your guests something they don't like. Isn't it? I said, all teeth, a smile that she returned. If you are here for another match, Victoria. Then Claire started, and since I wasn't exactly packing a team ready for a rematch, I did the secret move that defeats any and all dragon trainers. Surprise Gummy. I called out and released Brave onto the table in front of everyone. What? Ah, I expected this. Lance said, the only one not surprised, but the Elder's face lit up behind his massive beard and eyebrows that blocked his eyes from being seen. He reached out and Brave looked at his hand that didn't invade her space and woogled over to jump onto his offered palm. What? Claire repeated breathlessly, her eyes locked on Brave. Even Lance was looking jealous as the Elder looked over Brave as she sort of examined him in turn. Both of them sort of looked the other over, Brave even spinning around as the Elder shifted her to look all around, helping him see all of her. How wonderful. Squeeze her. I whispered out, desperately hiding my excitement. He asked, and I made a motion with my hands to show him. Lance of course nodded sagely as he already knew what was about to happen. The Elder looked down, as Brave now looked excited and woogled up and down as if bouncing on her toes waiting for something fun. He squeezed. Claire squealed, hands on her cheeks, and the Elder of course reached enlightenment. It took a while to get the dragon trainers to relax as Brave was passed around and delighted everyone. The Elder's wife even came out, a woman just as shrunken as him, who delighted just as much. Then one of Claire's cousins, just a boy, popped up wondering what was going on, and he delighted in Brave as well. I had a feeling as the crowd around the tea table grew that if I didn't do something, Brave would soon take over the entire Blackthorne City, becoming queen of all she surveys, and all would beg for time to squish her. The power of Gummy was not to be underestimated, I realized. Thank you, Victoria. I'd heard from Lance about the new dragon type, but to hold her in my hands? A delightful experience. The Elder spoke to me, as Lance once more was acting as king of the Gummy, Brave giggling up a storm as he showed his mastery of dragon types by stretching her out nearly to the floor as everyone watched on. Truly, Lance was a strong rival. If Lance manages to beat me, then I'll let him try to make friends with a Gummy. I explained in a whisper. But if you want to stop by and see if one wants to go with you, I'll allow it. The old man snickered in delight, and I had a feeling he might just take me up on that, but in the end he shook his head. Let the boy earn it. I'm too old to train new Pokémon. He offered with a happy smile as I looked over and realized this old man was watching his family basically make fools of themselves to play with a new dragon-type Pokémon. Ah. What would that feel like? To see children, and grandchildren, and generations of your family all happy and content. I eased back into my chair and just luxuriated in the feeling of happiness. It made me want to go hug Gram. Maybe even consider picking up a cat or something to make her happy. I shrugged off the feeling and looked to the elder who was watching me now. You came to ask something? He offered, no doubt, sensing that it was time. Yeah. I'm trying to prove something, and I was hoping that you might know of some proof I can use. Friendship evolution. I explained, and he hummed at my request. It is said some Pokémon require a strong bond to evolve, but I have nothing besides old tales. Well, those are better than nothing. Chansey evolved into Blissey, and that was a friendship evolution. I know it. There are others. Most baby Pokémon need a friendship to evolve, but I think it isn't noticed much, because they're babies and taken care of. But I know it's a real thing. I've experienced it. A difficult task. Modern science scorns such things. Bonds and friendship. He said sadly, and I nodded. Yeah, I've run into that. But Seras, that's the professor I started helping out. He gets it. He loves this world, and the Pokémon in it. I just need enough evidence. People need to know. I see. I will write down an account of what I know. If that will help, I'll look through our old library. There might be something in there. I almost gasped at the old man's offer. That was huge. Enough to make a huge difference, but also, thank you, I said, unable to hold back the emotions in my chest. It is the work of the elder to help the young. I don't offer an apprenticeship to just anyone. He reminds me with a look. Of course his look was strongly diminished with the fact I couldn't see his eyes behind his massive eyebrows. But I still appreciated the sentiment and sent him a thankful smile. Thank you, elder. It is my duty. Now. There is another thing. He said loud enough that everyone's attention was grabbed. Teaching a Gyarados to fly. You do this, and don't even show it off, while battling the Blackthorne. He said, for once sounding actually upset. That's right. Claire called out, slamming a hand on the table. You fought my Gyarados, but didn't even show that yours could fly. Do you think that we're so weak? And to not offer this elder a ride atop a flying Gyarados? An experience foreign to this ancient one. The elder continued cutting off Claire, who went a bit pouty, and her angry challenge was interrupted by something completely the opposite. Hee. If you want flying Gyarados rides, I'm sure we can come to an agreement. Blue Heart loves flying after all. I offered, and the old man's smile lit up, and even Lance perked up at the idea. Oh. Me. One of the Blackthorne kids called out, and I just laughed at how quickly these dragon-obsessed trainers could switch from cold arrogance to begging to let them play with the cute Pokémon. This is how humans should be. Alright, but I brought my other Pokémon too, and Lance. I was hoping we could have a family reunion. I'm sure both of our friends are feeling homesick at times. Oh? Of course. He grinned along with me, as I released my team. Teeny. Dratini instantly wrapped around my neck, and then the happy barks of Jangmo echoed out. Jang. He spun around and seeing all the people started his tippy-tap dance to sort of challenge them all, but not sure which one to challenge first. Gibble I released right next to me, and I reached down and gently picked her up, making sure she was focused on me, and not on all the people. I didn't want a Gibble tantrum right now. Oh. Very cute. The dragon family all cooed, and soon Lance actually went inside and came out with his own Pokémon. Jangmo instantly confronted Jangmo, and there was no challenge. Instead the two slammed into each other, hugging and nuzzled until they were basically a spinning ball of happy dragon pup. Lance's Gibble stepped out. It was bigger, and its eyes were clear. Looking up at Lance, his Gibble stood at his side like a loyal soldier. But one thing I noticed was that while the rest of the Pokémon all got attention, while Gibble was looked at, no one actually touched Lance's Gibble. "Ah, rough skin?" I asked, and Lance blinked before smiling pleased. "Indeed. I noticed the difference right away," he said a bit painfully. Yeah, I bet he noticed right away the moment he tried to pet his Gibble. Yeah, Gibbles sometimes have rough skin, and sometimes they have sand veil. My girl will probably disappear into a sandstorm. I cooed. Oh, that's a useful skill. But I think rough skin is the superior ability. Lance said arrogantly. If you're happy, that's fine. I said pointedly, sounding like I thought he was wrong. But that wasn't all that was happening. Gibble eyes met Gibble. This was something I'd been looking forward to. How would my girl react? I kneeled down, still holding her in my arms, and the two Gibble stared at each other. Then what I didn't want to have happen did. Lance's Gibble opened its mouth and growled, and even seemed like it was about to be aggressive to my girl. I could feel her tense, even if her face never shifted. She looked like she was used to it, which was when suddenly the entire area vibrated with a growl. I blinked in surprise and looked up. Dratini was angry. Like really angry. His fins were widened and spread out to make him look bigger, and his mouth was practically leaking dragon power as he prepared an attack. His eyes were not the kind shining look of a happy Dratini, but the sharp glare of a dragon about to make his wrath known. Neither Lance or I moved. A sense went through me that this was fine. It was normal. Gibble turned to Dratini, and the two glared at each other. Gibble's open mouth started gathering power. I didn't flinch. It wouldn't hurt too bad, but just as it was building up into a dragon rage, or maybe a dragon breath? No, it was dragon breath. But just as it was close to full power, Dratini gave a whistle. The feeling of air and power washed over my cheek, and a dragon pulse was fired directly into that powering dragon fireball in Gibble's mouth. There was a widening of Gibble's eyes as the power was disrupted, and suddenly the dragon breath went out of control and the Gibble just puffed. Smoke suddenly trailed out of his mouth as his big eyes rolled back and he fell backwards, rolling onto his back. Huh. Nice control, teeny. I told him, and his angry look disappeared as he turned back into my giggle boy as he nuzzled his head into my neck, happy at my congratulations. Impressive. Very nice. Such a well-controlled dragon pulse. Did you see the ring markings? It looked like a water pulse. Yes. I've seen Dratini born from Kingdra have similar markings. The dragon clan all around me seemed completely unbothered by the battle that just happened, and even Lance looked pleased, although he did kneel down, and even with rough skin, he checked on his Gibble. My Gibble was the runt of the pack. I said, explaining it to Lance, but letting everyone hear. She's still growing, still not really battle ready, so I'm not surprised one of her siblings would react like that. They tended to react badly around her. Sorry about that. No problem at all. The elder called out. Dragons fight for position, and your Dratini just made his claim rather strongly, I'd say. I think your Gibble might have a rival now, young boy. I think so as well. Lance agreed, looking pleased. He'll be eager to strengthen himself now, he said, looking at me. Yeah. I'm sure Dratini wouldn't mind an actual battle with him sometime. Isn't that right? I asked, and Dratini puffed up and whistled his agreement. He's cute. A voice I didn't expect said from beside me. I looked up and Claire was there, and her eyes. Ah. I grinned as I adjusted myself so Dratini was facing Claire, and he whistled a greeting at her. Ah. How cute. She cooed and reached out, and soon she was scritching him behind his fins, seemingly knowing exactly the best spots. It's so rare to see a Dratini that isn't one of ours. Yours looks a little different, his color is a bit brighter, look at those cute little scaly whaleys. Claire breaking into baby talk while soon nuzzling into Dratini was. Heh. They're all dragon nerds. I couldn't help but laugh along with Dratini and the normally serious woman cooing at Dratini. Yeah. These people weren't that bad. With all my baby Pokémon getting attention, I was soon relaxing with the elder who seemed quite interested in Gibble, which to my surprise she seemed quite interested in him. Her eyes locked onto him once I settled her into my lap sitting beside him, and both of them stared. Heh. This old man is just as interesting to dragons as Papa was to dogs. Gib? Oh. I think so. He offered back and I blinked because I have no idea what that was in response to. Gib gib. She said and he nodded, holding out a hand, and to my surprise she didn't bite, instead reaching out and grabbing at his hand, squeezing the old man's fingers. Very soon afterwards, Gibble was sitting in his lap, as she explored his fingers, while he explored her. His hands gently exploring her scales around her fin, seemingly delighting in every scale and groove. I couldn't exactly do an examination on Lance's new Gibble. He finally explained to me after a while, and I couldn't help but snicker at that. Sand Veil is obviously the superior Gibble ability. 'Cause you can hug them. She needs a bit more in her diet for her scales. Looks like she's been refreshing them. He muttered, and I nodded. I hadn't noticed, but I also wasn't around Gibble as much as I wanted. I pulled out my notebook and made a note to adjust her diet a bit with Blissey. Otherwise, her diet is impeccable. Even for the runt, you've mitigated much of her issues. Of course. I have Blissey help with diet stuff, and I want them to be happy and healthy. Indeed. He replied back, but soon Gibble leaned back and was napping still with her eyes open, but the snores were rather telling. This is quite the ride. The elder called out, quite pleased from where he sat on Blue Heart's crest horn opposite me as we flew around the skies above Blackthorne. I was still fighting back cackles from every member of the dragon clan around, making whining noises, when I set off with the elder first. He's actually pretty comfortable. Although the rolling motion takes a while to get used to. Indeed. Like riding waves. But it's a delight. He offered back, and I knew he was being honest, because the old man had a massive smile on his face. We circled a few times before we lowered back to the ground, and with a bit of help from the Dragonite, the elder was lowered to the ground without roughing him up. Blue Heart even being such a good boy to hold still while the Dragonite walked around him. He really is quite peaceful, isn't he? Lance asked, as he stood beside me, as I rubbed Blue Heart's cheeks as he rumbled at me. Of course. He's the goodest boy. I told him, and then just like Claire before me, I fell into baby talk as I squeezed and mushed up his face. I picked up a Magikarp, an egg from my own Gyarados. I'd appreciate some tips on how to train them. Oh sure. I agreed happily as I turned to the older man. Of course it's going to cost you, bird boy. He sighed, and to my amusement reached out and dropped a hand onto the top of my head and mushed my hat into my head. That joke again? He grumbled, and I just cackled at his reaction. Until we get you a full dragon team without flying type. Fine. I accept these terms. He said and then grumbled a bit. But the tips for my Magikarp? So you can have a flying Gyarados. A flying type. I repeated just to hammer it home. Gyarados are dragons. Their typing doesn't matter. He said firmly, and I met his glare with a smile. That's true. That earned me a pleased smile in turn. Lance got it. Once I'd flown quite a few people around, Blue Heart was just happy that he got to fly with me longer than normal. I finally returned him, and gathered my kids. Jangmo had finally gotten sick of being cuddly with his sibling, or cousin, and the two were now bashing their heads together. Brave had been passed around to be worshipped like the queen she was, and Gibble was quite happy to just sit on the chair the elder had left and be doted over by his wife. In the end, I gathered up my team and followed Lance out of the growing party. We weren't just taken to a pool or something, no. Lance took me down into a carved cave and then down. Welcome to the Dragon's Denver. This is the most sacred and protected place to the Blackthorne clan. So no Draco meteors. Please. I had to bite back the laugh to give Lance a serious nod. I won't. Good. Down and down we went until we hit water, and to my delight, there was an underground waterfall, deep into this massive cave. Atop the very peak was a torii gate of all things, and there was a crack above the torii gate, letting light fall directly down onto the entire waterfall. Did the Blackthorne already know about this? I asked, with suspicion, because everything about this place. It was perfect for training a Magikarp into evolving. It is suspicious, is it not? When you spoke of leaping over the Dragon's Gate, he looked up, yeah, this was definitely set up for one thing and one thing only. And yet, we checked through our records. Not one mention of why this room is so important to be set up like this, or anything about a flying Gyarados, besides some old rumors. So they forgot? Or maybe, one Blackthorne knew and kept it secret? Huh. I'm kinda jealous, this is way cooler than the waterfall I used. But I wouldn't trade my training location for anything, 'cause that's where I met Blue Heart. I said, reaching down and running a hand through the honestly freezing water. Mountain runoff. BRRR. Well, let's show you what I've gotten to already. Go Magikarp. Lance called out Ah. What a cutie. Carp carp. It greeted Lance, splashing around happily. Well, I'll offer what I know, but the big thing is just support. 'Cause they are going to fail a lot. Chapter 94. It was a quiet morning, even though I was hanging out on the porch watching the road. Today was the day the annual journey began. When young 10-year-old trainers headed off into the wilds, with nothing but a Pokémon and gumption. It was also something I'd kinda been looking forward to. See, there was another bit of cultural stuff that trainers starting their journey don't really think about. All the trainers that had already gone on their journey, all the older trainers that only had their pet Pokémon. The wanderers, and even just the Pokémon rangers disguised as normal people would be out there for the first week or so as well, to give the new trainers something to clash against, while also getting to see how the newbies were doing. And of course protect them if they had to. There was just one problem. Vicky, really? No one's going to want to battle you if they see you. So let them have their time. Mama reminded me as she passed out some cookies to me and Riolu. I know that. But I still want to check on them. I whined, but I was playing along, and as Mama patted me on the head, I began to enact my sinister plan. Everyone was starting to leave, so I headed towards the back of the house with a backpack and a ring of Pokeballs. You ready? I whispered to Arcanine, who snorted at me, and stood up. I had to leave Arcanine at the stables, because if she knew what day it was, there was no way she wouldn't want to battle all the new trainers. Then we were off, running off into Viridian Forest, along one of the main paths. I passed plenty of trainers that I recognized hanging around waiting, and laughed at the look they gave as an Arcanine blurred by. But then I found a good spot, and crawled off. Thanks, Arcanine. Come pick me up tonight if I'm not already home, okay? Arky agreed, our pact long since sealed with secret treats leading to this day. Then it was time. I walked behind a tree and pulled on my super secret ninja disguise. No, not Nike, she was the protector of the moon and had no time for this. Dang. I bought this wig years ago, and it still fits. It must really be stretchy. I told myself, and then I stepped out. Mwahaha. Ruby Red has returned. The red hair and red jacket meant I was a fire-type trainer, the perfect challenger for all the kids out here. Then I released Blissey, who popped out and looked around, taking a moment to look at me. Our eyes met. She brought a flipper to her mouth, and I could see her entire body ripple. It's not that funny, I informed her, but a moment later it all came out. Bliss, 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 bliss. She burst into laughter, and all I could do was stare at her, pouting. That's so not fair. She stumbled over and pulled me into a hug and patted my wig, still giggling. It's not funny, I repeated, and she just continued laughing. Whatever. You know what to do, I demanded, and she continued giggling even as she grabbed my bag that I'd left and headed a bit farther into the woods. Blissey was going to make a camp, so the kids and their Pokémon could have a snack once I smacked them around. Slapping my cheeks a bit to get rid of my irritation, I looked around and realized that I'd be waiting here for a while, huh? I sighed and trudged to follow Blissey and help her get set up. Even if I had to deal with her giggles. Red hair just didn't suit me after all. You. Trainer. You come face to face with Ruby Red, Fire-type expert. I announced as I jumped down from a tree, landing perfectly thanks to my ninja training and then power stance, into pointed finger. Perfection. The boy looked startled, jumped back and even balling his fists at my appearance. What dash? Hoo 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 hoo. I laughed as I locked eyes. Our eyes have met. So a battle must now commence. Release your first Pokémon. Gore. No, another brat. What are you waiting for? Send out your Rattata or whatever. Come on, Charmander. Char. I felt my eyes brighten at seeing my favorite starter. Oh, a Charmander. What a delightfully fierce and cutie boy. I almost broke character and started rushing for a hug but shook it off. Very well. If you face a fire-type expert with flame, I will do the same to teach you a lesson. Go Pillow. I threw a Pokeball and out came Pillow. Growlithe? He asked confused, looking around. Cough cough, Pillow, we're doing battles today. Cough cough. Pulled it off. Growled Growlithe. He grumbled, looking not super pleased, but I pulled out the secret weapon. If you complete this battle, there is a camp that you can rest in on top of your favorite pillow. I explained and Pillow was suddenly all for it. Geez, you have to make deals with your own Pokémon? Aren't you too young to be a trainer? I'm 11. I've already gone on my journey and returned. I snapped at the brown-haired brat that looked like he didn't believe me. Sure. It matters not, we have a battle. Pillow. Growl. He jumped up and took a battle stance, and Charmander did the same. The lizard growled cutely. I wanted to hug him. Alright, flamethrower. I called out, and Pillow opened his mouth and a burst of flame and heat erupted. Charmander. The trainer shrieked, not ready for such a powerful attack, and instead of doing anything useful, Charmander was soon dodging, jumping back and forth into the grass to avoid the attack. Ember. Use Ember. I blinked. Oh right. This was a normal trainer's first day. Flamethrower would be too much, huh? Too bad though. I would use this as a learning experience. Hoo hoo hoo. I cackled as the Ember hit Pillow, and suddenly his aura emerged, as he appeared as if he was on fire. What? Silly trainer. Did you not make sure to figure out your Pokémon's weaknesses to the common Pokémon of Kanto? Weakness. It's a fire type. That's right. But do you know Growlithe's 2 common abilities? I asked, and suddenly right then the boy reached into his backpack. Ah, déjà vu, but Ruby Red would allow it. She was a magnanimous fire-type expert. Soon the boy was flipping through the Pokédex, and Charmander was looking really worried as he looked from Growlithe to his trainer. I threw the poor thing a wink when it looked back, and to my surprise it actually seemed to relax a little from what it thought was a more serious battle. Aha! Growlithe. The puppy Pokémon. Fire type. Ability. Intimidate? No wait. Flash fire. Immune to fire moves. He yelped in shock and I once more broke into laughter. Hoo hoo hoo. You see. Your Ember attack did nothing but power up my Pillow's incredibly powerful flames. What will you do now, trainer? Now that you have discovered your error? See Charmander. Don't use Ember again, instead charge in, and use Scratch. Pillow, use Ember. Show them how it's done. Pillow opened wide, and out came embers of flame that Charmander winced as he charged through before getting up close, and scratching Pillow across the nose. Growl. He whined as he winced at the attack. Unfortunately for Charmander, Pillow might be a lazy house dog now, but he used to be a wild pack dog. Even if Papa and I didn't train them for battles often, we still gave them training to protect the house. Pillow played gently with the Charmander, but unfortunately after the first tackle back, Charmander started already flagging. Although I did my best to mitigate it, Charmander simply couldn't overcome Pillow's energy. It fell with a whine and the boy slumped. But... aha. A loss, perhaps your first? I called out and the boy looked up. He wasn't looking great. Like he was ready to start crying, but that was what I was here to stop. Not to worry. All trainers lose. It's about what you learn from your loss that matters. Come, let me show you a trick. I waved the trainer to follow, and he returned Charmander and did so, right into the little medical camp that Blissey and I had set up. Wah! Blissey, we have our first customer. I called out, and the goddess looked up from stirring a stew and waved a greeting. Her peaceful bearing made even the boy relax, and soon he was sitting on a camping chair next to Charmander, who was being healed, as both of them ate a warm meal. But I lost. He finally managed to say, and I scoffed. So? Everyone loses. You just started. I told you I've been a trainer for a year, right? I reminded him, and then I pulled out a plastic bag. Here. What is? Oh. Consider it an emergency kit. A potion, an ether, and 2 extra Pokeballs. I know how quick they run out. Don't forget. Today isn't the day you have to win every battle. Today is the day you start the path that leads to that. I said, smiling happily, and the boy looked much happier as he pulled out the medical stuff and Pokeballs and put them in his bag. Blissey gave me a nod, and I nodded back. Well, once you've finished eating, your journey is still waiting for you. Don't forget to take breaks to give Charmander a break. Back-to-back battles are no good. I informed him, and then headed back to the path to wait for the next challenger. Today was going to be fun. What is it? Ah, it's a rare Pokémon from far away, not one a trainer will find information for in just any Pokédex. I called out, and then once more laughed. Hoo hoo hoo. But, what's the point of the Pokédex then? Ah, trainer, you think everything in this world has been discovered? I looked at the battlefield where Jangmo was absolutely loving it, facing the girl Squirtle. She had instantly pulled out a Pokédex when I released him and was now freaking out at not knowing what to do. No. But it should have them all. You will run into many Pokémon on your journey you won't recognize. You may even one day face an opponent at a tournament without knowing your opponent's Pokémon type or weakness. But is that it? If you don't know something, do you just give up? No. You decide the best course of action, and battle through it. I called out, and Jangmo barked along with me. Grr. Fine. Squirtle. We won't let this weird Pokémon win. Which was a bit rude, Jangmo was cute, you know. Bubble. Squirt. Squirtle. Jangmo. Dragon Claw the bubbles. Dragon Claw. Jangmo blocked most of the bubbles, but a few got through, which actually meant this was good training. He tanked the rest with his crest and shook off the hit after. Does it matter? No type is better than the others. Just battle. Fine. And then I smiled as the girl got into it. She even used a tail whip to weaken Jangmo's defense. Smart. But Dragon Claw was enough after a few hits to knock out Squirtle. I was about to recall Jangmo when the trainer grabbed another Pokeball. Awesome. Go. She called out and released something I didn't expect. NID. Nidoran. It growled, noticing Jangmo. Nidoran female sign, huh? Well, good for her. She was already a better trainer than Charmander boy. Considering Jangmo's defense was weakened, I wasn't actually surprised when Poison Sting actually caused Jangmo to slump a bit after a nasty hit. Very well. I returned Jangmo and smiled at the girl that looked like she'd just gone into a tournament match with how tired she looked. Well fought. Finally. She mumbled, slumping, and her Nidoran ran up and nuzzled at her. Come on, I have a camp nearby. I told her, and while she did narrow her eyes at me, she did follow, to experience the grace of divinity. Arcanine ended up interrupting a late match as the sun had already long set, and the poor boy with a Bulbasaur wasn't up for the rest of his battle against Brave. That's fine. I had a feeling she was getting close to just dropping Draco Meteor. Too much dragon in that one. I ended up healing him up, packing up the camp, but leaving the fire and campsite for him to rest in, as I jumped back on Arcanine and headed home. I only barely remembered to take off the wig and jacket and stuff them into my bag as I got home, and as I entered inside, Papa was already there waiting for me. He took a moment to look at me, and then smiled. Tell me how your day went. Hee hee. They were so fun to mess with. I gushed, and soon I was on the living room couch explaining the battles I'd given, and I'd lost more than I'd won. Gonna go out tomorrow? Probably not. I passed out all the care bags I intended on. You're sweet, Mama said, fluffing my hair. I'm shocked anyone wanted to fight you at all. Didn't they recognize you? I'm a master of disguise, I assured both parents, and the look they shared told me they didn't believe me, which was a bit rude. Well, good. We've been looking into things, and if you're up for it, we're thinking of going on that family vacation. Wait. You mean it? Alola? I asked, perking up as the conversation shifted from what I was expecting. Yep. Papa confirmed. It's getting cold here, and your mother and I both think a nice tropical vacation would be perfect, Papa said, turning to Mama, and there might have been some eye waggle. She slapped his shoulder, but then looked at me. We know you've had all sorts of plans with Professor Seras, so we haven't locked anything in yet, but we wanted to offer the idea for sure. We've been looking into the tickets, and this time of year it's not too bad. A lot of families don't want to vacation just as the journey starts in case of any issues. So the flight to Alola isn't too expensive, and I want to, I said, but not super excited, but instead serious. I really do need to go to Alola for Jangmo, and I wanted to go there anyway, I admitted, because Z moves were big. But what about? Nothing to worry about. We have a clan now, Papa said, and looked actually pleased. Leo has already spoken to cousin Shino. He'll house sit while we're gone, feed Arcani and the pack, and of course look after the Milotic. Great. Then I just need to figure out who's coming? I'll need Jangmo obviously, and Dragonite can come. She can watch over the flight even, or Vicky. There are a lot of restrictions on what Pokémon that Alola will accept. Before you make plans, let's go down to the vacation planner and they'll help us answer all those questions. Mama offered a bit overly kindly. I didn't want to leave my friends here though. I shook it off and sighed. Okay. We'll figure it out. I want to go, stupid restrictions. Vicky. Your Gyarados won't be allowed to come, Papa said, and I looked up in surprise as Papa was blunt. Victor, I was trying to be gentle about it. You know how she is, Papa said with a smile that he offered me. You'll need to plan for that, okay? Right. Right, Blue Heart can't come, I mumbled, and that tore out my heart a little. He'd be so lonely without me. I'll go talk to him, I decided, and stood up, and before anyone could say anything I headed outside. It was chilly, and there was still snow all over, but as I walked over to the water, I didn't care. Blue Heart slipped his big derpy head out of the water to greet me, and I just fell against him in a big hug. I hadn't really imagined an Alola adventure without Blue Heart and Milotic. Without Dragonite or Arcanine. Without any of my friends. But if I wanted to cross regions, there would be rules. Hello, my heart, I whispered to him, and he rumbled in return. I know he'd be lonely, but he had made friends among the Milotic, and he'd have my other Pokémon. But still, I didn't want to leave him behind. I took a breath and started explaining what was going to happen. You sure you don't want to come, Gram? I asked, and my grandmother just gave me a look. Faye. Me head to some silly island? Humph. They have dark type Meowth there. The Persians have silly faces, I teased. I'm aware, child, Gram grumbled. A proper Persian should look fierce and strong. Not that. I couldn't help but giggle as Gram complained about Alolan Persian. He was so derpy. But it was cute. Maybe I should catch one? I asked to the air, and I could see the physical pain Gram took at the fact I was actually saying I would catch a cat, but that I would catch that cat. I know you're teasing me, grandchild, but it still pains me, she muttered, reaching out and ruffling my hair. If it helps. Alola also have Litten. That, she made a sigh and grumbled all at once. They won't let you, believe me. She decided to say, and I couldn't help but laugh at that. It's okay. I don't think I'd want an Incineroar anyways. Arcanine would either love it or hate it. I decided, and Gram chuckled. She took a bite of her snacks as she turned back to the TV show that was on. Pokemon TV was weird. Soap operas with Pokemon were like at least 80% better than Earth soap operas. If only because they had these really well-groomed Pokemon strutting around looking pretty. Of course Gram was only watching because one of the Pokemon that the bad guy had was one of our Persians. His sinister face was so cute, especially since I could tell with the way his tail twitched that he was actually 1 second away from rolling over and demanding belly rubs. You be careful. Traveling that far. I don't like all of you being in a plane, but that son of mine is confident. Gram mumbled, and I felt a sense that. Gram? It's nothing, child. She mumbled as she pulled me into a side hug. I was really tempted to have Dragonite fly along with us, but apparently the Rangers would flip out. I added because I wasn't entirely comfortable leaving my safety in the hands of others when I had a perfectly good jet bomber Pokemon. Heh. No, it's safer now. There haven't been any accidents in years. Us old people are just still wary. Her face looked from me to the show, but then to the corner of the room, where pictures of the family were stacked up. There were plenty of faces in those pictures that I'd never met. People that no one spoke about on how they died. Did someone die in an airplane? Instead of opening old wounds, I just snuggled in. Look, Persian is half a second from mauling that guy. Humph. Huh. So he is. Would serve that fool right. Gram called out as the man on the show was talking about how weak Persian was. Even if it was for a TV show, I doubt that Persian liked that guy much after this scene. I went over my journey bag again. Thankfully it was the only luggage I needed, but I still didn't want to miss anything. I looked up and Pillow opened his eyes and yawned at me before going to sleep. It was early, the sun not even up yet, which actually didn't mean much, considering it was winter, but still. Sleep well, Pillow. I called out as I threw the bag on my shoulder and walked out. I was in my winter clothes for now, but I had a quick swap gear for warmer weather ready. Mama and Papa were the same and we all smiled as we met up. There was thankfully no vacation rush. We'd packed and prepared well the night before. All right. Let's go. Papa turned and smiled brightly as Lucario did the same, as she disappeared into his Pokeball. Uff. I groaned loudly as I bent back my neck and stared at the ceiling. Papa laughed as he reached over and pulled me into a side hug. Thank you, Vicky. It's fine. I grumbled. I could only have 6 Pokemon with me, and there were a ton of restrictions. In the end I decided on the baby team since the only adult Pokemon I could bring was Milotic and Blissey and that sucked. We'd have to leave Dragonite behind, and I'd made a promise to her. And I kinda needed Blissey to stay home to keep watch on everyone. Mostly Arcanine. So instead, I had Gibble, so I could help her relax. Mimikyu, which was restricted everywhere, but Alola funnily enough. Jangmo obviously. Brave, and Dratini, I'd go swimming with him instead of his papa. Then I was bringing Riolu because Lucario was coming. Originally Papa and Mama had wanted Lucario on my team, but obviously, my limit was an issue, so Papa was now the proud trainer of Lucario. It sucked, but well, it was going to happen, I knew. Lucario just fit in with Mama and Papa more. Especially since she'd been going with him to train Growlithe, and had taken a liking to the police training. I let it go, and turned to the door. Time to go on a new adventure. Chapter 95. Airports were boring. I kicked my feet as we sat on the seats waiting for our plane to accept boarding. We'd gone through a ton of stuff. Pokeball scanners that inspected our Pokemon, full body scanners to ensure no additional Pokeballs were hiding anywhere, and we'd had to do some paperwork before all of this to explain some of the rules about capturing Pokemon in Alola that would basically hold us liable if we went against it. The rule was simple enough. Don't. I muttered the word as I held Jangmo's ball. As we'd been ready to set off, a familiar person had stopped us. Brushfire was as annoying as always, but at least he put out his cigarette before getting too close, not that it made him smell less like an ashtray. Your Pokémon, Jangmo-o, and Mimikyu too, are Alolan Pokémon. We have the evidence they weren't captured there, but it could cause issues if you bring them along. I have to. Well, I could leave Mimikyu, but that's not fair to him. There's something I have to do at Alola, and Jangmo-o is involved. I explained and the man sighed. All right, here. He'd actually handed me a pack of papers. Keep that on you while you're there. If there's any issue with Jangmo-o, that explains Kanto's perspective on Jangmo-o being a Kanto Pokémon, and we won't allow any theft. But it might be best to keep him hidden. One of the things I need to do is talk to the kahunas, I added, and Brushfire just held in a groan. All right, well, I'll let the diplomatic corps know. Don't blame us if something happens, we only have so much power on Alola. Thank you, Mr. Brushfire, but I think Vicky has this in hand, Papa said, pulling me into a side hug, and the other man just nodded. All right then. I wouldn't mind hearing about the face they make when they realize one of their prize Pokémon are out in the world. Alola's always been difficult about Pokémon transfers. Good luck, and enjoy your vacation. He'd bowed to all of us, and Mama and Papa did the same before I slowly joined them. That was this morning outside the airport, and now after everything we were just waiting for the plane. Boarding for Flight A243. Finally. I called out as I stood up, grabbing my bag and following Mama and Papa. They had the tickets after all. We walked among the small crowd. The plane wasn't exactly the massive 747s that I remember from Earth, but much smaller jet planes. The double row seats meant I had my own seat in front of Mama and Papa, and I was thankfully alone. Taking the window seat, I settled in and looked outside, seeing the preparations. A Pidgeot rested on the wings, in weird little grooves set into the wings, and right now a trainer was out there, checking on his Pokémon, feeding them and stuff. Then he headed inside, leaving his Pidgeot out there. I waved, and the Pidgeot saw me obviously. I bet with their eyes, they could see how many hairs I had out of place. It nodded to me, which was enough to bring a smile to my face. Then I settled in, and just waited. Soon, the stewardess went around and gave us the safety rules. The only concerning one was what to do in case of a Pokémon attack. The answer was basically don't release your Pokémon to try and battle, because you will damage the airplane. Then the plane taxied out, and the Pidgeot settled in deeper into its groove, basically forming with the wing, and as we started moving, it just stayed there, its feathers waving as the wind struck it, but it didn't get thrown off. It stayed with us all the way up, and once we seemed to settle into flight, it poked its head out and just. It reminded me of Arcanine sticking their head out the window of a car, just enjoying the wind even though it was just hanging out. So I guess that explains how they keep the plane safe. There was another Pidgeot on the other wing. Huh. That was probably a nice job, but it seemed super boring. Just flying around constantly as your Pidgeot protected the plane. I shrugged and instead dug into my bag since I wasn't doing anything else up waiting, and pulled out my Pokédex. Time to review some Alolan Pokémon. A long flight later, we stepped out of the plane into the airport, and into a party. The entire building was very open, with people flowing through, and it was just. I breathed in the warm Alolan air, and let it out. We'd left in the morning, and it was like 12 hours later we landed right in the middle of the morning. I was a little tired, but the excitement of being here had it evaporate away. Yeah, this was nice. Alola greeted the woman that was waiting on exit. Please head to baggage claim over there, or to the exit terminal. Have a wonderful stay. Alola. Thank you. I cried out in return and waved, and she sent me a big smile as all three of us headed towards baggage. I might have my super bag, but those were pricey, so Mama and Papa just had normal luggage. We gathered our things and walked out the large glass doors into an exotic locale. Palm trees and the smell of warm beaches, and I took a moment to soak in the sunshine. Kanto had been getting super cold recently, so this was really how nice. Papa whispered and Mama hummed as she pressed against him, the two of them cuddling for a moment. I want to see the beach. Oh, a ride Pokémon stall. I want to explore the oceans. I have my rebreather. I gasped, pointing at all the stuff we could already see just from the front of the airport. There weren't even car rentals or anything, it was all Pokémon. Although some of the Pokémon were pulling carts and things to make it easier for the elderly, it was all really warm. Let's get to our hotel first, before you run wild, Vicky. Ah. I whined but followed Papa. We hit the hotel, got our rooms, and we split up. I headed into the bathroom to get changed, since I wanted to jump in the ocean. I considered my wetsuit, but the water should be great, so instead I just slipped into a one-piece swimsuit, and threw an Alolan shirt over the top along with some shorts and flip-flops. All gear bought in preparation for the vacation. A comfy vacation look. I put on my normal straw hat as well, just to complete the look. Beach vacationer Vicky is here to battle. I said to the girl in the mirror. What's that? Mama called out from the room. Nothing. I giggled as I hurried out. Once we finished putting our luggage away, it was also time to release everyone. Papa waited until we were outside, and released Lucario. Watching the dog Pokemon startle a bit at how warm it was and look around in awe was actually pretty sweet. She closed her eyes and sniffed the air, and I could see a smile stretch across her face. No doubt her aura sense was also telling her how warm Alola was. Seriously, this place was really special. I released Riolu just after, and she seemed just as interested as Lucario as she looked around excitedly. The warmth made her fur stand up a bit, almost like a flush. Alright, well, let's split up. Vicky, no trouble today, okay? Take it slow. Papa ordered, and I nodded. Yep. You have some money. So why don't you go explore? I know you want to. We'll meet up. Right there. Papa pointed out a restaurant across from the hotel. In a few hours for dinner. Well, breakfast or lunch, I guess. He mumbled and I laughed, as I turned down the street heading for the beach. I wanted to go jump in the water. Lucario. Ryu. I heard the whinging behind me and made to run, but was stopped by Papa. Take Riolu with you. I bet she'd enjoy the beach. Papa said, and I threw him my most disgusted, unhappy face, but that only earned me a laugh as Papa pushed my hat over my head. Go on. Hey, no fighting. Get along. Rio. Never. We both said at the same time and then glared at each other. Riolu. Yeah, well, you have dog breath. Riolu. She gasped, and then Lucario was there glaring at both of us. Sorry. I mumbled, as Riolu made her own apology. Lucario Rio. Yes, Lucario. I mumbled, pouting. I just wanted vacation time. But we were let off the hook as the adults headed one way and we headed the other. Riolu and I didn't say anything to each other at first as we headed towards the beach, but as soon as the palm trees and little shops opened up to the wide sparkling beach, I forgot all about her and gasped at how wonderful it all was. Beach vacation. Riolu. I nodded and then hurried forward. I wanted to find a ride Pokémon stall. Would they have Lapras? They were still endangered, but I've always wanted a Lapras ride. The two of us came up to ride stall and looked out. Where a bunch of Pokémon were just hanging out. All of them with fun saddles or ride equipment. Alola. Looking for a ride Pokémon? Alola. Yes. For the ocean. I want to go explore. Haha. The older-looking man at the stall smiled widely and pointed out a sign. Got plenty to choose from. If you want to go diving, then there are diving Pokémon. Sharpedo is excellent, very fast. But if you want something slower, Mantine is a good option. Oh. Sharpedo. They're so cute. I decided, and that caused the older man to laugh bright and loud. Well, don't usually hear that. Usually it's the boys calling them cool. No, they're wrong. Sharpedo are cute. I argued my very truthful and factual point. I like you, girl. I'll let you go out with Hammerhead. He's a good one. He'll take care of you. Thank you. I cheered as I passed over the Poke Dollars, and soon we were settling onto a Sharpedo. The owner giving me the basic instructions, but honestly, it really came down to, you could guide the Pokémon, but he'd go where he wanted. But that was fine. Of course Riolu climbed on behind me, and I grumbled, as I pulled out my rebreather. I only have one of these, you know? Riolu. She argued looking tough, but I had a feeling I'd be sharing once we went under. I nodded as she climbed on behind me. She'd wanted to be in front, but I was actually tall enough to reach everything, and she wasn't. Heh. Thank you for taking us out. Let's have fun, okay? I asked the Sharpedo, as I stroked his side, and his little eyes smiled at me. Pedo. Sharp. He spoke back happily, and then the gate was open and I held on as we burst forward. Haha. I laughed as we raced out of the lot, and then almost as soon as we were out, we burst into the ocean, diving below the waves. I quickly put on my rebreather and then we were there. The oceans around Alola were teeming with life. Nothing like even back on Cinnabar, that was semi-tropical, as well, but this was real tropics. I could see through the perfectly clear water, tons of Pokémon hanging around. Alamamala, I think I saw some Wishawashi hiding among the rocks and coral, some Chincho hanging around just lighting up their little antennae. There was a pair of Mantine swimming together in slow spirals. But that was put aside as Sharpedo absolutely floored it. Riolu's grip tightened as the water pushed us back, but I held on and we just blazed past all the Pokémon out further and further into the ocean. I could look out and see others. Swimmers above us enjoying the waves, and a few other diverse on-ride Pokémon, some not. I looked back and Riolu was also wide-eyed as she looked around. I sighed, blowing bubbles, and took a long breath before pulling out my rebreather and offering it to her. She blinked and looked hesitant for a second before nodding and putting it into her mouth. A moment later, she actually seemed to relax as she got the hang of using it. The ocean was super beautiful. If only I could share it with Blue Heart and Milotic. Ah well. Maybe I'd come back someday and we'd all go swimming. I bet Blue Heart would love this clear water. And it would be fun to go from swimming to flying above the waves too. Riolu passed back the rebreather and as we swam around, exploring all the Pokémon and coral formations. I peeked into one hole and saw a Krabby give me a glare for invading, and we hurriedly moved away before he started pinching. Riolu giggled as a Loveduck started spinning around her head, poking at her ears. I had to pass back the rebreather so she wouldn't drown. She was giggling so much. Sharpedo knew all the cool spots, and even swam us out to the continental shelf. Riolu and I both sort of edged over the side of Sharpedo to look down and down and down, and for a moment we were on the same wavelength and shook our heads at each other. No way I was going down there. Then we turned back around and up to the surface, until we exploded out into a big jump. Wahoo! I shouted as we got air, while Riolu howled but still had the rebreather in her mouth. Then we hit the water and dived for a moment before surfacing and Sharpedo cackled. Sharpedo! Suddenly we were going all out, water shooting up around us, faster than any jet ski could hope to reach. Yeah. Full speed. I shouted and laughed as we hit a big wave climbing up the side of it and launching us into the air. That was a blast. I groaned as I stretched out. We'd returned Sharpedo after giving him lots of hugs and thanks for showing us around, and Riolu and I were both a bit stiff. Riolu. She muttered, patting her stomach. Yeah, I'm hungry too. Let's try that. I pointed, noticing a malasada shop. Rio? It's yummy. Well, so I'm told. Come on. I ran off, Riolu rushing to keep up. We entered the little shop that smelled almost too sweet. And headed for the counter. Alola. 2 malasadas please. I ordered and the guy there laughed happily. Alola. 2 orders coming right up. He called, making them right there, and soon Riolu and I both had a big sort of donut of fried bread and cinnamon, and yummy. Riolu and I both bit into it at the same time, and soon we were both devouring the sweet treat. We both finished at about the same time, and we both had to wipe our face of all the sugary mess that it had left. That was really good. I muttered, no wonder they were so popular. Rio. Alright, I'm going to get some more for everyone. I bet Jibble would love one of these. I said, and Riolu actually nodded without making a fuss. She might be a brat, but she'd still made friends with the others. I headed back inside, and ordered 5 more. Then I set the stack of pastries on an empty table, and started releasing my friends. Teeny. I was quickly wrapped up, and Dratini looked around with shining eyes at the sights and sounds, as did everyone else. Mimikyu was soon slipping under my hat, which tickled, and I reached down to pick up Jangmo so he could get on the table to eat. Okay, I got one for everyone. So don't fight, okay? Once they were settled, I helped Gibble, and she quickly started chewing. It took her a few seconds as she chewed aggressively before she slowed, and then she swallowed with a big gulp. Gib, she said, and that was probably the most positive response she'd ever given to the state of something before. I mean, she was always very food-orientated, but it was one thing to eat everything, and another to like it. Liked that, did you? I asked her, rubbing her belly. Gib. I picked her up, so she couldn't wander around, and looked over my friends. Brave was crying out happily as she took bits of her meal, her body bouncing up and down in excitement. Dratini was taking little chomps as he coiled around his protectively. Mimikyu had snuck his straight into my hat, and I was pretty sure I'd have to wipe crumbs out of my hair later, but he was just happy to be close to me, so that was fine. Jangmo was tippy-tapping as he stuffed his entire face into his meal, and I laughed as his little tail was wagging so fast. Riolu, I could tell, was really wishing she could have seconds, but I shook my head. We'll get some real food soon, it's almost time to meet back up with the parents. She pouted at me, but I was unmoved. The last thing I needed was to get my Pokémon stuffed with sweets. That'd be terrible for their diet. As the slower eaters were finishing up, I heard it. A shout. Hey! I looked up at a surfer boy. His tanned skin and blue hair spiked up into a slicked back mess really gave him that surf bro vibe. Yes? Where did you get that? You can't capture Pokémon here. He shouted, and I blinked before realizing that he was talking about Jangmo. You mean Jangmo? Of course I do. Are you a poacher? Or something? Don't think just because we let you foreigners visit that we'll allow this. It'd be pretty stupid to show off a Pokémon right in the middle of the city if I was? I asked, and he only glared, as I shrugged. I found Jangmo in a distant land while exploring. There was a pack of Kammo there. That's impossible. Kammo represent Alola. He shouted loudly, and seriously, this guy was like 10 octaves too loud. Well, they aren't only here. I explained, and Jangmo, finishing his meal, barked at me, as he noticed what was happening. He jumped off the table and scrambled in front of me, glaring. Ah. My little buddy was being protective. You shouldn't act like that with an outsider. He argued at Jangmo, who didn't seem to care, only scuffing his feet in challenge. Is there something going on here? A new voice intruded, and I smiled as the uniformed Officer Jenny approached. Whoa, Alola Officer Jenny had a cool armored-looking vest, very tactical. Officer Jenny. This outsider has a Jangmo with them. The server bro called out, and Officer Jenny looked at everything for a moment. Alright, nobody move. Until I figure out what's going on. Please return all of your Pokémon. She pointed at me. Riolu. Riolu, of course, jumped in before I could say anything, fist raised as. Oh, she just didn't want to be returned so she could try and get more snacks. Brat. Riolu, relax, I'll have you back out in a minute. I assured her, and she turned to me glaring, before scoffing and crossing her arms. I returned her first, because she was seriously a pain, but it was sweet she'd jumped in to defend our friends. Gibble was next, which let me start returning my friends. Teeny pouted at me, and Brave puffed up at the officer and surfer bro. She was definitely half prepared for a Draco meteor. Brave really was the type to protect her people. Then I pulled out my hat. You too, Mimikyu. I told him, and he continued worming his fingers into my hair. Kukekeaku. He tried to argue. Whoa. A Mimikyu. The surfer bro backed up a step and Officer Jenny looked on guard, but I reached up and patted him a little before returning him, and plopping my hat back on my head. There, good enough? I figured Jangmo should stay out since he's involved in all this. I offered, and Officer Jenny slowly nodded, while Surf Bro looked red even below his tan. A Mimikyu too. You are a poacher. Rude. I'm totally not. I mumbled, as I reached down and picked up Jangmo, holding him in my arms so he couldn't get any more aggressive with this random guy. Let's all calm down. Although I would like an explanation. Officer Jenny cut in, getting between me and Surfer Bro. These are my friends, and I brought them to Alola from Kanto. I have the paperwork. I informed Officer Jenny, waiting for her to figure out what she wanted to do. Paperwork? She asked herself, before nodding and holding out a hand. A moment later, the stack of papers was pulled out of my bag and plopped into her hand. She looked them over. I see. This all checks out? She whispered, still looking pretty upset. What? She has a Jangmo. That doesn't check out. Surf Bro yelled out, and even Jenny looked pretty disturbed. I suppose if someone walked into Kanto with an Arcanine, or Johto with a Dragonite, they'd be pretty concerned too. I'll need to verify this paperwork. We've had poachers using kids before, and we've had poachers using government protection as well. She finally decided, stating it firmly. Please come with me. I'll be taking you down to the station. Ah. I wanted to hit the beach again. I whined, but followed Officer Jenny to her little cop car. And settled into the back. Beach Bro looked pleased with himself, but in the end. I shrugged. I'd be fine one way or the other, and I still had a job to do here. The Commonium Z still blazed in my pocket. I was planning on tracking down a kahuna in the next few days, but I guess it was happening today. Ugh, Mama and Papa were going to worry when I didn't show up. I'd have to get Officer Jenny to give them a call. Chapter 96. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. I sang as I clicked a cup that Officer Jenny had given me along the bars. Nobody knows my sorrow. My completely on tune and deep baritone voice that definitely resembled the original singer of that song, and that wasn't at all super fucking annoying, continued on. 'Cause that was the only part of that song I actually remembered. Officer Jenny sent me another look of real annoyance, but the fact I seemed to be occupying myself and not doing anything but singing and making noise meant she left me to it. Which is of course when someone new entered the police station and I continued singing. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. The old man, massive in size, with a jovial air to him, looked from Officer Jenny to me, and then back to Officer Jenny. Officer. Is there a reason the child is inside a cell? She asked for it. I asked for it. I called out at the same time, smiling happily, smacking the cup along the bars. I'm a good girl, so I didn't really expect to see the inside of a jail cell before, so I asked if I could wait inside. Then I opened the door 'cause Officer Jenny really was a stickler, and hadn't locked the door, and walked out. Looking the big man up and down. I am Hala, Kahuna, of Melee Melee Island. Victoria Ferrous. Dragon Master, from Kanto. I returned, smiling happily as I put the slightly battered cup back on Jenny's desk. Although his eyes were tightly closed, I think my exuberance had put Hala on the back foot. He once more looked to Officer Jenny, who returned him a blank stare. I see. I was told about the issue, a Jangmo found with a foreign trainer, and the paperwork that claims it came from outside Alola. Yep. I found an entire pack of Kamo in a region north of Kanto, and a bit south of Sinnoh. I don't want to say you are lying to me, Victoria, but this is a very unusual circumstance. Sure, I get that. To be honest with you, I brought Jangmo to Alola to run into you, or any kahuna really. When I met the Kamo, their elder gave me a challenge. He showed me a very unique dance. A specific set of moves. Moves for Clangver's Soul Blaze. I said, my eyes locked on the kahuna's face, as I pulled out the Z crystal. He gave me this when I showed that I learned the moves, and sent me off with Jangmo. I promised I'd come to Alola. Show me. The kahuna said a moment after I finished talking, and I blinked for a second before shrugging. I took a few steps back, and with the crystal in my hand, I started the haka. My favorite part was the Kamehameha motion, because how could I ever forget that? But I felt it. That same energy, that grasping connection. But this time without an outlet. Huh. I muttered, looking down at the Z crystal, as it glowed for a moment before dimming. I see. Hala muttered, looking at me, I think. He still had that squinty eye thing, so I couldn't track what he was focusing on. Officer Jenny, I would like to see this Jangmo. Yes, Kahuna. If that's all right? He surprisingly asked me. Oh, sure. I shrugged, and then not longer after Jenny pulled out my pokeballs. Then released Jangmo. Jang. Jangmo. He barked as he was released and dashed to my side, standing in front of me, and readying for a challenge. His little paws tapping on the tile floor as he just seemed to dare anyone to accept. Oh? Quite the brash one, isn't he? He's amazing. I agreed, and Hala grinned as the large man lowered himself down. I wish to ask, are you from Alola? Have you ever been to these islands before? Jang. M.O. Jangmo shook his head and continued glaring until Hala nodded. Then the paperwork seems to be the truth. As Kahuna, I have no choice but to confirm this girl's innocence. Thank the Tapu. Now I can release her. Jenny sighed, and I just grinned because she really was wanting to just cut me loose. I definitely annoyed her a bit too much. Lucario. Lu. A familiar shout echoed out, and a moment later Lucario came rushing into the police station and jumped in front of me, ready to defend. As Papa and Mama both rushed in behind her. This. A police station. Vicky. You. Jenny, release my daughter this instant. How dare you? Papa roared, and Mama looked vicious with a snarl that matched Meowth. I'm already free. I called out loudly, to interrupt the misunderstanding parade. That stalled out my family, but there was still a moment as everyone caught their breath. Papa and Mama had obviously been hurrying as they seemed to take in the entire scene. What is going on here? Papa demanded, and Mama and Lucario both nodded in the exact same way. Geez, just rub it in, why don't you? I believe I can answer that. Hala said, his voice gentle. I apologize for the misunderstanding. I am Hala, Kahuna, of Melee Island. What exactly did my daughter do to get the Kahuna's attention? Papa asked a bit aggressively. Having a Pokémon that is considered impossible to find outside this region and bringing it back to Alola. The Kahuna offered, and Papa didn't look pleased. But I have verified that your daughter and the paperwork was the truth. Jangmo is her Pokémon, and comes from beyond Alola. This is a shocking surprise to me, but I do apologize again for this situation. It must be quite distressing to find your daughter in a jail. It is. Papa practically growled, but he took a breath as our eyes met, and I smiled at him, showing it was okay. But I think we can put this behind us. We're here on vacation after all, even if we just had to run out on our lunch. Allow me to make up for it. I would. If it's not too much of an imposition, I would like to ask about this Jangmo, and how your daughter has already completed one of the island trials. When he said this, Mama and Papa both looked confused, before he continued. Perhaps you would join me for a meal? I assure you, you won't be disappointed. I looked brightly and nodded to Papa, who seemed to consider it before sighing. Since Vicky seems to want to, I think that would be acceptable. It was a bit of a surprise that Hala walked us down the road and right up to a place I recognized. Ana's kitchen. I whispered the name and perked up. This was Mallow's house and restaurant. I followed the large man, Mama and Papa both hovering over me protectively, and Lucario following, with Jangmo in my arms. They'd relax once we talked it all out. The inside was an open room, windows all along the walls, making the entire place bright and sunny. Welcome. An older man behind the counter called out, and Hala waved in greeting before setting down in one of the round tables. Come join me, you'll find this restaurant has the best food on the whole island. Hala called out happily, earning a laugh from the owner. I'll do my best to meet your expectations, Hala. Thank you. Papa said a bit stiffly, and Mama didn't say anything. She still had her angry glare eyes locked on the Kahuna. Soon enough all of us were seated, including Lucario, and Jangmo was in my lap, looking at Hala. I was pointedly, I noticed, sitting between both parents across from Hala. Might I suggest some meals? Alolan fare is not something to miss for foreigners. Papa took a second before nodding. Please. Excellent. Hala took a moment to give the order to the owner, and then he turned back to us, his face in a gentle smile. Your daughter is impressive. I've never seen a foreigner complete an island challenge before ever stepping foot on Alola. It is unique. Vicky is special. Mama said then, almost cattily. There was still a lot of tension in the air. So, should I just start talking about my adventure and how I ran into Jangmo? I asked, because otherwise Mama and Papa were just going to continue to be tense. I would be quite honored to hear it. This whole situation is shocking. Well, it started when I traveled out of Kanto to find rare Pokémon. I'd heard a rumor about a mountainous area where tons of rare Pokémon had eventually migrated to get away from people. I started talking, explaining the trip although never mentioning where exactly, and then about how I'd found the Kameo tribe. Even pointing to Lucario to tell them that's where I'd met Lucario, and it was her daughter Riolu that had taken me to find the Kameo. Well, I talked to the old man that claimed to own the Kameo. He was pretty obsessed with them, even had a helmet shaped like them. He mentioned that it was an ancestor that had gone on a sea voyage. Well, I kinda inferred that his ancestor was some sort of pirate. I think at some point he came to Alola and captured a bunch of Pokémon and returned home. The Kameo elder gave me the Z crystal after. Hala nodded quietly as he took in the whole story. There are old stories of ships from before we had anything nearly as large, about evil men that came and captured Pokémon. And more. I frowned at that, but eventually Hala nodded. But to find out that some of those Pokémon still live, still carry on the traditions, Hala seemed almost broken up about it. Kahuna? I asked, and he looked up and smiled. I am simply praying for family long lost. He offered. Jangmo had listened and watched this entire time from my lap, but at that he barked out. Jangmo. Jangmo sat up in my lap, claws on the table in front of me, and puffing up as he stared him down. Heh. Of course, I suppose it's not so lost after all. Thank you, Victoria, for this story. I will need to share it with the other kahuna, perhaps now we will have answers to some old wounds. Ah, sure. Glad to help? Indeed. I will ensure that no one else bothers you about Jangmo. And Mimikyu. I said quickly, because no way I was going to let anyone cause problems for my buddy. A Mimikyu as well? You. It always surprises me what trainers make friends with that Pokémon. Mimikyu are great. They just want to be your friend. Indeed. Hala said with a little smile. Food's up. The owner called out with a bright smile as he brought multiple plates of really tasty-looking food. Ah, but let us eat. Thankfully that seemed to actually help, and Mama and Papa both looked calmer as they started eating. The fresh tropical air was amazing after a big meal, and I stretched up to the sky as we stepped outside. Then I broke into a jaw-cracking yawn that I barely fought back. Tired? Mama asked, running a hand over my hair. Totally. We've been up forever. I said, and Hala hummed as he followed us out. I still wish to speak with you regarding the Commonium Z, but you are on a vacation. I will leave you for now, but if you wish, I will be hosting a ceremony tomorrow evening, if you'd like to join, to experience our culture. There will be a celebration after. Oh, that sounds nice. I said, looking at Papa, who didn't look entirely sold on the idea, but eventually shrugged. I'll consider it. Hala just nodded, doing a man-to-man stare if my instincts were right for a moment before turning, and we separated. Phew. What a day. I muttered before once more breaking into a yawn. Ugh. Sleepy. Vicky, are you really okay? Seriously getting arrested? Papa ended his gentle question with an honest growl. It was just some jerk that caused trouble when he saw Jangmo. Officer Jenny was really nice, and I really wasn't waiting that long for Hala. Alright. Papa whispered, pulling me tight, which I quickly leapt into a big hug. Come on, Victor, I think I'm with Vicky. I want to sleep even if the sun is still up. Mama whispered, yawning as well, and all three of us headed off towards the hotel. I was really starting to flag, the energy from getting arrested, and from meeting Hala, fading as we walked. What a crazy situation. I looked at Jangmo, who was walking happily beside us, and his eyes met my own. Neither of us intended on separating. We still had a lot of growing to do after all. We'll definitely talk to Hala, and figure out the Z-move thing. I told him, and he nodded firmly. Jang-mo. Do that tomorrow, after you sleep. Papa said, and I couldn't help but laugh at his snarky tone. I slept in, which was actually super nice. My Pokémon all shared the bed with me, even Riolu unfortunately. Seriously, that brat has sharp elbows. Dratini and Mimikyu being cuddle bugs made up for it though. As the Alolan moon lowered, and the Alolan sun rose up coming in through the blinds, I finally stopped napping and rose along with it. Looking over the room and my Pokémon, most of them not actually sleeping. Turns out Pokémon didn't suffer from jet lag. Instead, Riolu had turned on the TV and was watching whatever she or Mimikyu flipped it to. Thankfully, Mimikyu had attacked Riolu when she tried to turn the volume up high enough to wake me up. Which had woken me up anyways, but it was the thought that counts. Yawning and stretching, I settled in to finish whatever show that had Riolu entranced and watched the last bits of some weird Unovan cartoon. Unovan cartoons were weird. Getting up, I took a quick shower, which Dratini joined me for, and then we were all cleaned up and ready for the day. Today was going to be a fun day, and I definitely wouldn't end up in a jail cell this time. I popped into Mama and Papa's room to see them already eating breakfast. Lucario was sipping at what I suspected to be Papa's coffee cup, seemingly quite enjoying it. Morning. There she is. Finally got tired of sleeping? Papa teased. I just needed to sleep, so I was on Alolan time. I argued, pouting, and walked over to join them. I want to try surfing today, me and Dratini can do that. Alright. This is a vacation, and after yesterday I want to make sure you get some time to actually have fun. Papa said, patting me on the head. Just be sure to come back, we have that Kahuna's party thing. We might as well check it out. Mama added. Lucario? Yeah, I'll take the brat. I grumbled, and Lucario just tittered at my irritation. Rio, said Brat. Of course ran in as if she had heard someone talking about her and rushed over before slowing down as Lucario put down the coffee cup and Riolu jumped into a hug. When she was being a baby for Lucario, she was kinda cute. Then she finished her hug and ran up to Papa for a morning hug. I was wrong. There is nothing cute about her at all. Surfboard rentals were easy enough to find on the beach, and I was ready. Dratini was with me, and Riolu annoyingly was holding on to my leg as we paddled out from the beach. Seriously, Riolu, I don't know how to surf, so I don't think I'm going to be able to do it with you here. Riolu. Rio. She argued back and held my leg tighter. Ugh. I grumbled and ignored her. Just because she wanted to have fun too. Was this what having a little sister that followed you around all the time was like? One that was a brat and constantly caused trouble? Yes. Yes, it was. Slowly I made it out, and like the renter guy said, there were already a bunch of surfers out here. Alola. I greeted and got a few amused looks between them at my greeting. Alola. Never seen you before. The first boy greeted. All of them were tanned and obviously Alolan, but there were some differences. One boy had bright red hair, and another purple hair slicked back. Yeah, I'm just a vacationer, I said, and they nodded as if that was obvious. Well, you know the rules? Not really. Alright. The boys began, as they went into a quick explanation on the rules for who gets to surf. I moved to the right position and waited. Dratini poked his head out of the water beside me and chattering to me and Riolu about his current underwater adventure. Oh, it's almost time. You ready? I asked Riolu, who nodded. Then it was my wave, and I started paddling. I have no idea how to surf, but I'd done other stuff before, and well, something I'd learned in my second life, it wasn't about whether you could do something, but about trying it. Fail or succeed. I was going to hit this wave. Alright, Riolu. I called out as I rose up unsteadily on the board, but to my delight Riolu standing up with me helped secure my back leg. Okay, now it was just like skateboarding. Or snowboarding. Just on a wave that moves around. I held my stand as I hit the wave, and the board shifted under my feet. I gripped it well, and we started going up. Oh no, that's too much up. I hit the ocean, Riolu yowling her own displeasure, as the board had gone flying straight up into the air, and then Dratini was there, eyes sparkling in delight as he wrapped around me and brought me back to the surface. Better than any life preserver. Bwah. I gasped as I hit the surface, and then started laughing as Riolu was there annoyed at the failure. Riolu. Riolu. That was just the first one. Come on. Let's go try again. I called out and Riolu stopped getting upset and instead started swimming for the board. Hee hee. As we paddled back, we got some laughs and one of the female surfers even came and slapped me on the back. Nice try. She teased, and I just grinned up at her as I sat on the board, Riolu behind me. Thanks. It's my first time. I'll get it this time. Or the next. I said chipperly, and she blinked at that, and then her teasing turned into an honest grin. First time? Not bad. Here, when you leap up, make sure your front foot is like this. She started teaching me. Teeny? Dratini came up and she yelped a bit as she noticed him and jerked back a bit, but I noticed despite the surprise she didn't fall off her board that she was showing me the move. Yep, back to waiting. I told him, and the girl settled back down and looked at Dratini in wonder. What is he? She asked, her hand already halfway out to pet him, but hesitating. Teeny? Dratini. He greeted her, and swam over so her hand could reach him, and he giggled at her exploring touches. Dratini, he evolves into Dragonair, and then Dragonite. I explained, and the surfer girl's eyes widened. Whoa. Dragonite. She looked shocked as she looked up at me, and then down. Those are supposed to be super rare. Sometimes we'll see one flying around some of the islands, but no one really has much knowledge about them. Heh. In Johto, they have a whole clan of dragon trainers that have tons of Dragonite. I'm the only trainer in Kanto that has one. Well, two technically. Dratini's mama is back home. Yo. Cola. You're up. Right. Hey, I'll chat with you later. Alola. She called as she tore her eyes away and raced for the next wave. Okay, I was up next. Time to do this. I still fell, but this time I stayed on a few seconds longer. Success. Chapter 97. Mama. I called out as Riolu and I raced down the beach. It hadn't taken long once Riolu was done surfing to find our family. The three of them were under an umbrella on the beach, with drinks in their hands, enjoying the surf. But the best part was definitely the funny novelty sunglasses Lucario was wearing. Vicky. Mama greeted me with a raise of her glass, but she didn't even sit up. No, she was fully relaxed. Riolu. Riolu called out as she scrambled up on the chair that Lucario was resting on and looking over the sunglasses in fascination. Lucario. She heard back and Lucario pulled off the sunglasses and pushed them onto Riolu's nose. Riolu spun around to show them off to Papa, who smiled at her behind his own sunglasses. Heh. How cute. I settled into the sand between my parents and stretched out. My legs were a bit sore after surfing. It used different muscles than I was used to. How was surfing? Papa asked, and I threw him a big smile. I got the hang of it near the end. The other Alolan kids all said that I was doing good. I cheered happily. Sure, it was mostly older kids just being nice to a weird foreigner, but it was still fun. Nice. Are you hungry? Sure, I could eat. I confirmed, and soon the waiter that had been keeping my parents' drinks topped up came by to pass out some food, and I soon had my own little beach party with all my Pokémon. Jangmo running around in the sand, absolutely having a blast. Brave sitting up near Mama in the shade and enjoying the array of beach drinks through a straw. Dratini and Riolu running into the waves together and having fun splashing everything. Gibble sitting next to me, her hands in the sand and seemingly quite happy to try all the things that I pushed into her mouth. She didn't react as positively as she did with the malasada, but she was just happy to eat. Mimikyu of course hung out under my hat, sneaking treats as I passed them up. It was just nice. Vacations were supposed to be like this. Just everyone having fun. Sure, we got plenty of looks from people as they saw my menagerie of Pokémon, some obvious Kanto natives, who might even have been on the plane with us walking down the beach, stopped and stared in shock at Dratini as he played. Excuse me. I looked up from where we were making sand castles on the beach. It turned out that Gibble rather liked being inside sand, so we'd taken to building sand castles around her, which she'd inevitably break out of, and then we'd just make a new one. I don't think she really noticed that we were building something around her, she just liked moving around a bit sometimes. Which was a shame, because her Godzilla impression was really funny. Yes? Papa called out, and I turned to see. It wasn't anyone I recognized, but the woman smiled and bowed. You are the Ferrous family, correct? I'm Maro. Kahuna Hala has asked me to come find you, to invite you to tonight's festival. The woman smiled and Papa and Mama both considered it, looking to each other, but nodded, as they got up. Seriously, my parents had been lazy all afternoon just sitting in the sun and drinking. Mama even took a moment to get her balance back. Mama might be slightly tipsy. All right everyone. I called out and my friends all ran back. All of them raced up, and I couldn't help but laugh at how coated in sand Riolu, Jangmo, and Dratini were. All right, come on. I scooped up Gibble, and let Braid jump on my shoulder. She wasn't very interested in the sand. Then I had a little train of Pokémon following. Maro seemed to take in my little horde with interest, but didn't say anything as we followed her. There she had a ride Pokémon, a big Mudsdale, pulling a cart that everyone climbed into. I did end up returning most of my Pokémon to fit. Then we had a gentle ride through the streets, and up into the dense jungle, but we weren't alone, plenty of natives were heading up here as well. I enjoyed the car ride all the way up the path, sinking into the atmosphere as eventually the path was lit by torches and the people all seemed happy. Then the cart pulled into a little sort of parking lot, although it was just dirt, but it was obvious the rest of the way was on foot. Please enjoy the celebration. Maro told us with a bow, you can leave at any time, or if you wait for everything to be finished, I'd be happy to take you back. Thank you, Ms. Maro. Mama said, and that meant we were free to walk past the next turn in the trees, and suddenly there we were. A big stage, fires and food all over the place, and people hollering and cheering. Rio. Riolu. Yeah, food sounds good. I agreed as Riolu called out, looking from the food to the rest of us eagerly. Let's get some food and take a look around. Papa agreed, and so we did, to my surprise as we approached the food tables. There was someone I actually recognized. Mallow. The green-haired cook was setting out dishes onto the table, and she gave me a bright and happy smile as we approached. But she looked my age. Wouldn't she be the same age as Ashwood by Sun and Moon, like Forever 10? Are you the one cooking? Thank you. I offered before she could disappear, wanting to see if she was real, and that was the correct words. Not all of it, but I did a lot of the cooking for tonight's festival. Please eat lots. I will. Thank you. I'm Vicky. Mallow. I have to run. Alola. She offered goodbye, running back off to a shack that was set up nearby that was either a cookhouse or just a storeroom for the food. Alola. That was weird. I shook it off and focused on what was important. Riolu and I dug in, with Mama and Papa taking a bit longer, but soon we all had a plate of food as we settled into what was happening. Through the crowd I could see Kahuna Hala standing on top of the stage, but he wasn't really doing anything on stage, just talking to some of the people standing near the end of the stage. Then Hala nodded and looked up, giving a nod, and a loud drum went out. The crowd went silent as the drum beat continued and Hala took the center of the stage. Alola. He roared out just as the drum finished, and the entire crowd cheered back to him. Even I joined in, once I realized what was happening. Ha ha ha. Today we celebrate another year. And another group of 11-year-old children growing up. These children will soon begin their trials. They will explore and grow upon these islands, and as they grow, their love of our home will grow with them. Yeah. Woo. The crowd shouted back happily, and Hala just looked pleased at the interruptions. As always, we hold this festival to celebrate our island. To ask for Tapu Koko, to look over all those who live here, and who grow under the Alolan sun. This year, I won't even force you to watch a sumo match. He laughed loudly as the whole crowd cheered way louder than before at that. Only once it settled down, did Hala continue. This year some of our children will put forth their strength and will in a Pokémon battle. To honor Tapu Koko. I gasped in delight, because this was like the beginning of the Sun and Moon game. On each side of the stage walked up two people. One that I recognized. On this side we have our very own How of Melee Island. Hala called out, adding a bit of emotion into his voice I noticed as his grandson took the stage looking a bit bashful. The crowd of course cheered for such a famous kid. Then once the crowd calmed, Hala shifted. And on this side from Akala Island, Kiawe. The scion of Paniola Ranch. The crowd went just as wild, Kiawe, and it took a second for me to remember. That's right. Kiawe was the grandson of another kahuna as well, only his grandfather had passed, and he looked just like he did in the anime. Or at least as much as anyone could compare an anime to real life. So, this was just how it was. This battle that had been set up was between two grandsons of kahuna. Interesting. I looked up and saw that Papa and Mama were confused, so I tugged on their shirts and told them in as quiet a whisper as I could and still be heard. They're both grandsons of kahunas. It's like if two gym leader grandsons fought on stage. I added some context and Papa looked back up interested, while Mama just nodded and went back to her food. There were a few more comments about dedicating this battle to Tapu Koko, and then Hala stepped off the stage. I was excited to see what was going to happen. Battle begin. Then a moment later, How released a Rowlet that flapped and hooted out ready for battle, and Kiawe released Turtonator. Yikes. What is that? Papa asked, and I once more tugged on his sleeve. Turtonator, a fire and dragon type. It's very strong on the defense, and the spikes on its back explode if you touch them. I called out over the crowd and got a few of the locals that heard my remarks nodding. Alright. Rowlet. Let's go. How cheered, seemingly unbothered by the type disadvantage and the potential strength disparity. I mean, Turtonator might not really be trained, just a lazy home Pokémon, or something? Leafage. Flamethrower. I winced as the two attacks collided. The flaming leaves slowed the flamethrower a bit, but Rowlet dodged to the side, hooting in terror as the fire bulldozed through. As I watched, the battle didn't get much better. The fact was, How just didn't have much experience. It was obvious that Kiawe at least knew what he was doing, and How was just fumbling a bit. He did manage a few good moves, using the explosion of leafage to have Rowlet sneak in a tackle, but Rowlet struck Turtonator in the front since his back was facing the grass type. Turtonator just turned his head and started blasting. The battle was surprisingly long, until I realized that Kiawe wasn't really calling out much besides just letting Turtonator know when to defend and when to attack. It was all very softball. Then the battle was over. Rowlet took a flamethrower to the face and went down. How returned his Pokémon and instead of looking embarrassed or upset, just rubbed the back of his head with a big smile. Good battle. You too. Kiawe offered and the crowd cheered. Papa and I were both pretty. We looked at each other and I just shrugged. He wasn't impressed. Hala retook the stage and looked up to the sky and seemed. Ah, that's right. Tapu Koko usually cried out to celebrate the battle. I guess he wasn't impressed either. I see. It seems our guardian desires more battle. Hala called out and the crowd cheered. Kiawe stayed on the stage and stood proudly. I'll battle again. Ha ha ha. Who wishes to have a glorious battle under the Alolan moon for Tapu Koko? I waited looking around, noticing a few familiar faces. That was Lana, with her Poplio, but she didn't rise to the challenge, despite being a water-type trainer. Mallow was just happily serving food alongside her Bounsweet. But no one jumped up, which didn't seem to surprise anyone. There was chatter among the crowd and call out to see if anyone wanted to jump up there. I held back. Even if. Suddenly I had a push to my back. I looked not into Mama, or Papa's face, but Lucario, who'd given me a push. Our eyes met, and she smirked at me, and nodded. She'd realized how much I wanted to get up there and battle. It would be a perfect chance to settle things here in Alola. Papa and Mama didn't seem to mind, and Papa gave me a thumbs up, and Mama an imperious nod, a demand to crush this boy. Mama was kinda scary when it came to battles sometimes. I turned and started pushing gently through the crowd until I was near the front and I called out. Making sure I would be loud enough. Can foreigners take part? My voice cut through the happy chatter, and everyone seemed to now have eyes for me and holla. Oh? Miss Victoria, you wish to battle? It just seems like no one wants to really battle. So if it's okay, I'll battle. Ahahaha. Holla laughed jovially, and that seemed to settle the crowd who all chattered interested. How about a Kiawe? A foreigner wishes to take part? I'll battle anyone. Kiawe called out confidently, although I noticed he didn't seem super pleased to see me. Very well. May I introduce Victoria Ferrous? A guest of mine, here tonight from Kanto. Alola. I shouted out when I hit the stage at everyone, and I think that earned me some brownie points. Then I released the only Pokémon that would be perfect for this situation. Jang. Jangmo. My dragon roared out as he took the stage and instantly started tapping his feet in challenge. Turtonator standing beside Kiawe just grunted as it shifted, ready but Kiawe, and the crowd all gasped. Yes. Victoria carries with her a Jangmo, found outside Alola, a descendant of one of our very own, kidnapped centuries ago. She was even acknowledged by their totem. He said, and that cut off all of the potential outrage building up. Instead, everyone seemed shocked. Geez Hala, you didn't have to put it like that. The Elder Kamua wasn't a totem Pokemon really. Jangmo looked back to me and tilted his head and I just smiled, exuding confidence. Are you ready? Jang. I nodded and that was all he needed to cast off any concerns. He squared up and barked at Turtonator. Vicky and Jangmo. Ready for battle. I called out and Kiawe stepped out and slammed a fist to his chest. Kiawe and Turtonator. Ready. Then let this battle commence. Hala called out as he stepped off the stage. Pierce Dragon Pulse. I roared as Kiawe called out a flamethrower. It was something I'd noticed, he fell back on that move quite often, both to gauge his enemy, and to start things off. Dragon Pulse, the beam version, burst out of Jangmo's mouth and slammed into the fire. Where Leafage had failed, Dragon Pulse did not, and Turtonator had to sort of duck his body and head to the side to let the pulse shoot past. There was no commentary, the crowd cheered and stomped feet, but no announcer this time. But I could see that what I had just done had unsettled Kiawe. Turtonator. Flamethrower again, full power. He called out, and this time the flame was much stronger, and tighter. He had held back against how, probably Waitapu Koko, hadn't approved of the battle. Dragon Pulse area. I called out, and this time the power rippled out from Jangmo in a wave smashing into the flamethrower and pushing the flames away until it faded out. What? Do it again. Power through Turtonator. Our turn. Dragon Pulse control. Straight up, and then down. I called out, ignoring the attack coming our way. As Jangmo shot the dragon-headed Dragon Pulse straight into the sky before having it arc down like an angry dragon. He yelped as the flamethrower washed over him, but he kept his power going, and his head forward, his large head scale acting as a shield. And then the Dragon Pulse arced down and Turtonator cried out as the Dragon-type energy slammed it straight down into the ground, also cutting off the flamethrower. The crowd went silent, Turtonator slowly rose back up. Go close up. Dragon Tail. Kiawe called out, hesitating. Dragon Tail back. Duel him Jangmo. The two Pokémon charged, and the crowd erupted as the two attacks met in a clash of energy that washed over the people. Jangmo, despite his eagerness, was at a disadvantage though. He might have gotten training for Dragon Pulse, but this was a bit outside his experience, and it showed. He was pushed back each time as Turtonator's greater mass and strength plowed through. When was the last time I'd been in a battle like this where I didn't have the strength advantage? Dragon Pulse area. Push him back. I called out as Kiawe responded. Dragon Tail. Power through. The two attacks clashed. Jangmo basically exploding in an aura of dragon energy, and Turtonator slamming into that attack with his energy-covered tail. There was a clash as the two energies sparked, and struggled, a dragon clash. Then it was over and both Pokémon were knocked away. Jangmo skidded a bit before scrabbling back to his feet. Breathing heavy, and Turtonator had been knocked onto his front as he slowly rose back up. Dragon Pulse. Pierce. Flamethrower. Everything you've got. The Pokémon looked at each other as they gathered energy, and then the attacks erupted from their mouths. Fire and energy clashing in a sparking blast that knocked people's hats off their head as the air rushed out. And then it was over, and Jangmo's bark echoed out as he still stood while his opponent slumped to the ground. I could vaguely hear a cry of Turdy. But Jangmo took all my attention as I laughed in delight as he rushed around in circles, energy restored by his victory before he turned and leapt. I caught his flying tackle and spun him around as I lifted him high. You did it! I cried out and Jangmo roared to the sky at his victory. Then I brought him down and held him like he liked, with his front paws over my forearm and his back pressed to my chest so he could see what was going on, as his rear paws wiggled in the air in excitement. The winner! Victoria! Hala called out and the people did cheer, although I noticed it wasn't quite as loud as it had been for Kiawe versus How. But then a new voice echoed out over them all, and everyone went quiet. Tapu Koko liked my battle. I lifted my arm and waved. I'm glad you liked the battle. I called out loudly to the sky in return. Yeah. This was fun. An excellent battle. One that even Tapu Koko approves of. Hala roared out and the crowd this time went wild, as the tension that had been there for a second disappeared fully. I looked to Kiawe and walked over. He was kneeling next to Turtonator speaking to him. I waited until he finished before approaching. That was a fun battle. I offered to him, and he seemed to swallow back something for a moment before nodding. It was. You're a better battler than I expected. Hee hee. I'm pretty good, but that was still a lot of fun. Sorry about not really battling it out head to head. I know about Turtonator's shell trap. I didn't want Jangmo to explode. Jang. Jangmo yelped looking at me, and I just laughed a bit as I patted his head. It's a move, Jangmo, nothing to worry about. I wouldn't let it happen. I see. I was wondering. Most Jangmo are more aggressive. Yours stayed back. It does help that Dragon Pulse is like our main training move. So we haven't gone into physical stuff as much. I explained and then settled in beside Turtonator who was starting to come to, but only slowly. I wish I had Blissey here, she'd have your Turtonator back on his feet right away. It's fine. I'll take him to the Pokémon Center. Kiawe said and then returned his Pokémon and seemed ready to do that right away. Hold on Kiawe, before you run off. A new voice called out and again someone I knew. Olivia, the island kahuna of Akala. Kahuna Olivia. Kiawe greeted her, and she smiled. You've improved, and with this, your trial begins. Stop by some time. I'll put you to the test. Why yes. Kiawe perked up and I blinked as the two started talking. Oh well. I guess I should just. A hand on my shoulder, strong and firm, but not painful. I turned and. Victoria Ferrous. The winner of this year's Indigo Conference. I'm Professor Kukui. Please. Let me chat with you for a while. I'm absolutely blast burning for it. The man begged, practically, no actually shaking, and I realized it was in pure excitement. Wait, what? Kiawe asked, and I just laughed and rubbed the back of my head. Professor Kukui. Sure. I'd love to chat if you want. I said and smiled brightly at the man. Professor Kukui. You were probably my second favorite professor after Oak. I definitely wanted to chat with you. Chapter 98. And your battle in the finals. Well, I think that one. I wasn't really trying to show off there. I didn't want to really reveal everything, since I'm going to challenge the Elite Four, and I was just kind of tired. Well, it was still amazing. Kukui offered with a boyish grin that had me grinning back. We were sitting around the edge of the festival, Mama and Papa nearby, but I was having fun talking to Kukui. I'll say that I'm burn up excited after this fight though. That Dragon Pulse. You used it in so many different ways. I've never seen Dragon Pulse used that way. Well, dragons are a bit rarer, and the only reason I noticed something was up is because I have so many. I've seen Pokémon use the same moves differently before. It's not uncommon to have two Pokémon do the same move and have it radically changed. Yet it's rare to see someone teach Pokémon the same move multiple times. It's like Hyper Beam to the face. They were so different. Hee. I couldn't help but laugh at his tendency to add move names into his speech. It's the only move I've really done that with. I just noticed that my dragons had a tendency to use Dragon Pulse differently, each way had their own benefits. So I had them learn it. I saw. And heard. Pierce, area, and control, right? Good shorthand. Usually it's considered bad to try to overvary your moves, but the same move, he was definitely thinking fast. The Beam Dragon Pulse, or Pierce, lets the Pokémon keep adding more energy in, so it has a strong piercing mechanic. Area exudes the energy from all around them, making it a good shield, or disruption attack, and control lets them have some control over it. There's also Orb, which I didn't show. My grandfather mentioned it was usually bad to try and teach a Pokémon to use moves in different ways, but I don't agree. I doubt you know, but as a professor I actually specialize in Pokémon moves. What you just said. Heh. I think that way too. I wonder how many other moves are just like that, but we don't think about it. I'll have to start checking Pokémon moves, and how they use them. There could be dozens of differences for each move. TMs might also cause issues with that. I muttered, since I was thinking about all the moves out there, that sometimes no one even knew about. Oh. He blinked his eyes behind his glasses, flashing as he seemed to think rapidly. You're right. If they use a TM, then they're going to use the move in the same way. But that could be a benefit. What if a Pokémon learns the same move twice from a TM made using different versions? I don't know. I gasped excited, that would be awesome. It's entirely possible that every TM could actually have multiple variants. What if you needed to buy multiple TMs just to use different versions of Dragon Pulse? I might need to reach out to Luzamin. Luzamin? Oh, she's the head of the Ether Foundation. After the thrifty Megamart fell through, corporations started hesitating to invest here in Alola. The Ether Group became the only real TM production for Alola, but this is the exact sort of thing Luzamin would be overjoyed about. Neat. So, how about it? I asked, pointing at myself as Kukui grew a big smile. Well, in order to make a TM, you need a Pokémon that knows the move. So how about it? Want to make TMs with your different Dragon Pulse, and see what happens when we teach it to a new Pokémon? Yeah, let's do it. It's gonna be an explosion of an experiment. He cheered, laughing wildly. Well, I hope not. I added, and Kukui realized what he said and nodded more seriously. Very true. I'll use some future sight and avoid that, yeah? Yeah. I agreed, laughing. Kukui really did do the move name thing a bit too much, but it was an endearing trait. Vicky. Mama said as she appeared at my side. This is a vacation. You don't need to be adding more work right now. Mama said, and I was a bit confused at her reaction until she put a hand on my shoulder. She wasn't sure about Kukui. I guess if you didn't really know about Alola, he would seem like a weirdo. Before I could speak though, Kukui cut in. Oh geez. Here I am making a real mess of it. I don't mean to interrupt your vacation. I was just very excited to meet your daughter. I was riveted to the TV the entire time the conference was going. Kukui practically gushed, and I watched as Mama's demeanor softened. It was an impressive conference. It was the best. The most exciting Indigo conference since Lance. He argued, and Mama twitched a bit as Lance's conference battles were still a sore spot, I guess. Anyway, I can definitely make time to do a bit of research. I am a research fellow for Professor Seras, after all. I cut in, and Kukui looked excited to hear that, and Mama just sighed. Alright, but only for a bit. This is supposed to be your vacation. Hee hee. I laughed, smiling at Mama, who just sighed and rolled her eyes at my antics, and Kukui pumped a fist. So tomorrow we meet up? It'll have to be after school. He argued, looking a bit embarrassed. School? Mama asked, a bit confused, and Kukui's smile turned soft and gentle. I teach at the Pokémon school here in Melee. It's rather famous. The principal is from Kanto. He's a good man. Mama blinked at that information and I nodded. Samson Oak. I confirmed. Then I looked to Mama. His cousin Sam Oak was friends with Agatha. He's also the only last person in Kanto before me to have a Dragonite. I see. Mama muttered, looking surprised at this news. Oh, you know about that, huh? Kukui looked uncomfortable. Samson doesn't speak about his cousin much, but that was one of the reasons he came here. To get away from Kanto. Oh. Mama muttered, also looking uncomfortable. Right. The wars. I guess if your cousin died, and you knew a war was on the horizon, it might be best to just leave. Maybe you'll introduce me tomorrow? I asked Kukui, who looked a little startled. I wouldn't mind saying hello. Sure. I'm sure he'd be delighted. Kukui agreed, and I nodded. Excellent. Lucario. I looked over, and Lucario was holding some sort of Alolan drink and showing it to Papa. I could see her tail literally flapping a mile a minute in excitement, and Papa checked the drink and was chatting with her. I guess she found something she really liked. Kukui unfortunately had to tear himself away not long after, and we waited long enough to get a ride back to the hotel from Morrow. The next morning I was woken up by a much more energetic Papa and was dragged out to the ocean. Turns out he just needed some time to adapt to the new time zone. Mama was taking a bit longer though. Let's go. I howled and Papa and I both braced as the Sharpedo burst out into the water. Yeah. Woo. Papa cried out as he held on to the handlebars while I held on to him. Faster. I called out and the Sharpedo instantly put on more speed, happily crying out as the water kicked up even faster. Sharpedo. Yeah. We both laughed in delight as we did some fun father-daughter bonding. Not long after, Papa slowed down and ended up enjoying a bit of underwater exploration, swimming with a rented rebreather as we both went swimming alongside the Sharpedo exploring the waters under the Alolan sun. Watching Papa get chased off by a Payakumiku after it tried to punch him when he poked it was pretty funny. We swam around for a few hours before we both retired to the beach and met back up with Mama Lucario and Riolu. The two Pokémon were really playing up the vacation angle. Both now had novelty sunglasses, and were resting back on beach chairs eating treats from plates set next to them. Mama was just reading a book, and she smiled as we walked up, before shifting into a glare. Don't you dash. Papa, still dripping wet, walked over and despite her rather cat-like yowling, gave her a warm kiss and a hug. Mama's embarrassed, annoyed, and pleased face all at once was pretty funny. I still had some time before school would be out, so I just released my Pokémon. Everyone quickly settled into some game on the sand. Dratini and Jangmo playing hide and seek among the sand and waves. While Brave once more seemed to delight in just settling on a beach table and sampling drinks from a straw. Mimikyu leapt towards me, but after I caught him in a big hug I put him on the chairs. I'm gonna go swimming, I told him, and he instantly puffed up and shook his head as he backed away. Mimikyu hated water. With that settled, I focused on the girl of the hour. Gibble. Gib, she muttered as I settled next to her in the sand as she was once more just seemingly enjoying the whole thing. Do you want to go in the water with me? I asked her, and she didn't really respond for a while, so I pointed. See how Dratini is getting in the water? Do you want to try that? I offered her a hand and that did the trick as she gibed at me as usual and reached out to hold my hand. I walked her slowly to the ocean until we were just at the edge of the wave. I didn't want her to react badly if she didn't like water after all. The coolness of the sand caught her attention, and just as she was bending down to look at it all, the wave broke and just a bit of the water rolled up and over her feet. "Gib?" she called out, startled. Easily one of the strongest reactions I've ever seen from her, she lifted her feet up and down and then splashed a bit in the water. I watched closely, to see if she didn't like it, but other than sort of testing the water for a second, as it faded away she didn't seem to mind, and as the next wave broke and the water washed over her claws she blinked a bit and I could see her feet clawing a bit at the sand. Then without my prompt she took a step. Following the water, she seemed a little confused why the water was gone. Then as the next wave broke she reacted, patting at it with her hand. "Gib. Yeah. It's fun, right? Do you want to go deeper?" I asked, and she sort of toddled forward. Ee. She was exploring. It was hard to tell what she liked or disliked, and most of the time she just found a spot to sit, but here she was actually exploring something. I slowed her down when she got to the point the wave would get too much, and a moment later she was hit by the wave and had just managed to lift her off her feet for a second before it settled down. "Gib gib." She seemed to proclaim over the sensation, and when it happened again, I noticed she actually jumped into the wave a bit. "Gib gib. Yeah, it's fun, right?" Once she got used to that, even jumping up and down as the wave came in, I went out a bit farther, doing my best to block most of the wave. I offered to hold both her hands, which she seemed confused by for a moment until the wave came and lifted her off her feet, and didn't just instantly set her back down. I could see her instinctual reaction. Feet kicked a bit, and to my surprise she adjusted her body pretty quickly, using her little tail and horns to float with surprising stability on the wave as it ran out, and she found herself belly first in the sand. "Gib gib gib," she told me as I helped her back up, and soon she was actually swimming. I even let go of her hands after she got the hang of it, and I watched as the wave pushed her up the beach, but she was already swimming back before the wave left. I scooped her up when she reached me and set her back ready for the next wave. "Gib gib. Gibble." She chattered at me, and she was actually reacting. It was as if an almost nonverbal child started chattering happily. I'm so happy. This was massive progress. That's right. Swimming is fun, huh? We'll do it more often, okay? I'm sure the Milotic will love to swim with you. I told her, and she just continued bouncing a bit on her little legs until the wave came and she got swept up once again. Once I caught her, she actually wiggled a bit until she was back on her feet, and then she looked past me. "Want to go out there?" I asked her, and she just went silent for a while. And I realized that she might actually be looking at the ocean for the first time. She wasn't the most aware Pokémon. Had she even noticed what was going on? I helped her up and rose a bit so she could see out beyond the waves at the endless ocean. "It's a lot, huh?" "Gib," she said, then reached out and made grabby hands. Yep, she definitely wanted to go into the ocean. "Alright, but let's do some more practice swimming first, okay? Dratini. I need you." I called out loudly, and then walked a bit deeper, deep enough Gibble wouldn't be able to just touch the ground. "Gib gib." Okay. I'm letting go." I settled her into the water until she had some buoyancy, and then let go. She bobbed a bit. Gibble flowed apparently. The idea had me giggling as she sort of got her bearings, and then her tail and legs all worked together, and her claws started pulling her forward, and very soon we had a little Gibble monster swimming in the ocean. Dratini was there, as always, being a happy camper and calling out happily at Gibble as he swam around her, but she didn't seem to notice, just happily swimming forward until a wave hit her. Girbrrbrlr. I heard and winced a bit as the water flowed over her, but a moment later Dratini was there lifting her out of the wave, easily countering the wave, and she opened her mouth. Water gushed out, but then she seemed completely unbothered, despite just taking a mouthful of water, and then started swimming, or trying to again. Dratini and I looked at each other, and both laughed as we swam out to follow her. Soon we made it past the little breaker waves, to a calmer section of the ocean, and Dratini and I both swam around with Gibble. Thankfully she hadn't quite figured out the whole underwater thing yet. I was wondering when that would happen. Although seeing her fin sticking out of the ocean reminded me that Gibble was a shark. It was honestly fascinating to see how quickly she'd taken to the water. I was definitely going to have to talk to Seras about this when I got back to Kanto. Dratini was the first one to disrupt the fun little swim, as he bumped into Gibble, and she jerked at the touch. Gib. Teeny. Teeny. He seemed to tease her as he swam just a bit away, and she turned to chase him. I followed, and Teeny fell into a silly game with Gibble, reaching out to touch her, and letting her touch him, which to my surprise didn't end in a bite. Instead, she grabbed onto his tail, and he swam forward pulling her along, and that was something she liked, if the happy Gib Gib. Escaping her was anything to go by. The vacation, if nothing else, had been worth it for this alone. Gib Gib? Gib. Yeah, is that so? I asked her as I carried her out of the ocean and back up onto the beach. Eventually, she'd tired out and I had carried her back with Dratini's help. But for once she was actually talkative. Seemingly quite engaged for maybe the first time in her life. She blinked at me sleepily, and since I was now solid and holding her, she nuzzled into my chest and seemed to quite happily slip into a nap. Of course the peace was disturbed as I caught Riolu being chased by Jangmo as he barked at her quite angrily while she cackled. Rio 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 Rio. She laughed and I had no idea what was going on. Hey you too. I'm back. What's going on? I asked, and Jangmo broke off to run up to me, and despite calling to me, his feet tippy-tapped in aggravation in the sand. Oh. I recognized the signs of a temper tantrum. Show me? I asked, trying to cut through, and he nodded once harshly and raced back up the sand to where a broken sand castle lay, but I looked from the sand castle that had obviously been splashed by a bucket, but the water was weird, and Jangmo couldn't make a sandcastle very easily with his claws? Jangmo proclaimed himself king of the sandcastle, and Riolu splashed him with a bucket full of water. Mama called out an explanation and I looked at the wet sand understanding. Gibble might like water, but Jangmo definitely did not. Sorry buddy, how about I help in a second, okay? We'll make sure everyone knows you're king of the sandcastles. Jangmo. He flipped, instantly happy at the idea, and I relaxed. Phew. Don't take too long. It's already almost time to meet that professor. Shoot. Okay, I'll do that quick. Mama, can you hold Gibble? She's sleepy. I offered walking up to her, and she took a look at the snoring Pokémon, before looking up at me, and then sighing. Gibble soon settled in, wrapped in a towel as well that she was clawing at in her sleep, and I helped Jangmo dry off his sand castle, which honestly wasn't hard. It was a warm day, and it was already mostly dry. Riolu got a quick scolding for being a brat to Jangmo, but she got let off too. Then I had just enough time to grab some food, before it was time to go. Returning everyone, I headed up the main street and then down a jungle path. Flip-flops were a bit hard to run in, so I was at a calm strolling pace as I approached the Pokémon school. As I got close I could hear Happy shouting, and as I stepped out I watched as a pair of Tauros were racing around a track. Kiawe and Mallow were both going at it, and the others were cheering at the race. I walked along the road, keeping an eye on the race, and Kiawe won not long after with a small lead. The students all gathered together, and well, it was who I suspected. Lana, Mallow, Kiawe, Sophocles, and even Lily. The sun and moon cast. I walked down the road, and obviously they noticed me, but before I could really do much, a much taller figure waved from the school. Alola. Over here. Alola Professor Kukui. I yelled back in return, and while I waved at the kids and some of them waved back, I focused on what I was here for. Huh. Sorry if I kept you waiting. Kukui said, rubbing the back of his head. No, I just got here. I was having a fun time playing in the ocean, no worries. Excellent. Then how about we head inside? I reached out to Lizamon, and she said she'd send some equipment over. Oh good. I confirmed, although I did admit to being a bit disappointed. I wanted to meet Lizamon. We headed inside, and I looked around noting that despite the fact it was a school, the place was actually pretty empty. Heh. We don't have many kids here in Alola, and even fewer that go to the Pokémon school. So it's a little empty. It's kinda nice though. Sometimes schools can be a bit too busy. Exactly. The goal was to make sure the kids really get all the attention they deserve. Indeed. It took a mock-up amount of effort. A new voice called out as Samson Oak stepped out of a side room, smiling brightly behind his incredibly tanned skin. Heh. He really was the Alolan regional form of Professor Oak. Nice to meet you. I greeted him, and he stilled for a moment. Ah, Kukui did mention that a visitor from Kanto was coming to help with his research. I forget how long it's been sometimes since I've heard that accent. He remarked, sounding a bit uncomfortable. I can understand why you'd want to stay here. Alola is beautiful. I offered, and he smiled brightly. Indeed. It's my home. Well, come, I was just setting things up. Luzaman already finished her delivery quick as always, that woman. Already? Kukui asked happily as he followed Principal Oak into the room, which was a sort of lab room, and there it was. A TM machine. Well, all we have to do is make the TMs. Kukui said as he looked over the device. Well, that and have a Pokémon willing to share. He looked at me, and I just chuckled. Come on out. Teeny. Dratini chirped as he popped out looking over the area, and seemingly a little surprised there was no water. I guess he had been able to just jump in the ocean for the last few days. Dratini, we're making TMs for Dragon Pulse, we're going to see if we can make the TM come out differently for each different form of the move, okay? I informed him and he perked up mostly because this wasn't something he knew about and Dratini was always happy to try new things. Teeny? So how does making a TM work? I asked the two older men. Kukui just chuckled at the question. It's easy enough. Why don't you come settle right here, Dratini? But it was Principal Oak that was silent, looking at Dratini with nostalgic eyes. I wanted to ask. I really did. Where did Professor Oak, or I guess, just Samuel Oak, find his Dratini? Did he tell Samson the trick to evolving Arcanine? How did he die? Really? Did he know? But the man seemed so. He looked at me, and noticed my attention, and he put on a fake smile. I'll leave this to you and Professor Kukui, I seem to have drowsied an appointment. He laughed and walked out of the room, and even Kukui stopped and watched the man leave. Don't take it personally. Principal Oak is a dash. I don't. The last person in Kanto that had a Dratini that wasn't just a member of the Blackthorne clan was his cousin. Who died? I explained and turned to Kukui. It probably brought up a lot of bad memories for him. I should have brought out Brave or Jangmo instead. Kukui didn't say anything, just putting a hand on my shoulder. Right. We're ready. Let me explain what's going to happen. We put this device on Dratini's head, and he starts basically thinking about the move. We can open a window and shoot the move outside if he feels the need to, but it should work just with his thoughts if he thinks about the move clearly. Then a TM will pop out with the move. Okay, right. Let's get to work. We'll do the easy one. Dratini, think about Dragon Pulse Pierce. Teeny. Chapter 99. It took a little bit to get Dratini to properly get the move copied to the TM maker. But once he got the hang of it, things started flowing, and soon enough, we had 4 TMs with no idea if they were actually different or not. Alright. Now comes the interesting experimental part. Kukui said as he pulled out a Pokeball and released a Pokémon outside. Exeggutor. It rumbled a bit, and I looked up and up as the incredibly tall Pokémon towered upwards. Oh. A Dragon-type Exeggutor. Huh. A lock-on. They can't learn Dragon Pulse naturally. So they're the perfect tester, Kukui said with a smirk. They're perfect. Glad you think so. I caught this one this morning while figuring everything out. He's agreed to help us out for some food. Nice. I couldn't help but look over the massive Exeggutor, which was a dragon grass type. I bet Ivy would love this guy. I laughed at the idea of giving one to Ivy and her just having this giant palm tree hanging out in her backyard. Alright, like we planned, Executor. We're going to test this out, okay? Kukui called out, and it just rumbled a bit. Kukui returned the Pokémon and then attached the TM reader to the Pokeball, then slipped in the disc. I could hear it spinning around for a minute and then it finished. Kukui pulled out the now blank disc. Go. Kukui called out a moment later and Executor appeared once more. Okay, try it now. Dragon Pulse. A moment later, Executor's face lit up and a beam of energy blasted from its faces. Yep, that was Dragon Pulse Pierce. Okay, buddy, one more. He called out, holding his Pokeball to return it. As Kukui took a second to once more copy the second TM into Executor, he was actually writing down what was happening on a pad. Right. Difference between science and fucking around was just writing it down. Once again, the super tall Pokemon was released. Okay, buddy. It's the real test now. Dragon Pulse. EX. It called out as a Dragon Pulse Pierce once more was fired. Huh. Okay, try it again, try to control it this time. Kukui called out, and the Executor once more roared out. And a straight beam shot out. Interesting. I muttered, was the first TM locked in so he couldn't learn more, or did the TM fail because the move was already installed, or was he just kind dumb? Let me try. I told Kukui. I'd taught my Pokemon the differences after all, let's see what I could figure out. Dratini, you're up. Let's show Executor what we mean. Okay, so. Results? I asked the older man. Inconclusive. Kukui responded, but even with that he was still excited and smiling. In the end, no matter what we tried, it was always that first Pierce-style Dragon Pulse. We'd used all 3 TMs testing it, but that first install was the only method Executor seemed to want, or know how to use. We need another Pokemon to test it with. I said and Kukui nodded. I know, I'll have to head to Executor Island again. Sorry, I'll have to go alone, it's a nature preserve. I get it. Still, that was interesting. That's really strange, it's almost like the TM couldn't overwrite the move? Or maybe it couldn't teach it again? I muttered, rubbing at my chin. That's an interesting point. I've never heard of anyone trying to teach a Pokemon the same move from a TM like this multiple times. It really might be something that even the designers of the TM might not have thought about. I'll finish this report. Thank you for assisting. He said almost formally, and I just waved my hand. PSHHH. It's fine. Besides, I was interested too, but I think we can say pretty confidently that if you want your Pokemon to learn multiple forms of a move, it's probably best to teach it to them normally. Yeah. Talk about a bulldoze. This report might be actual proof that TMs aren't as foolproof as they like to say. Huh. You sure you want your name on it? The big core that make TMs might be pretty upset. Kukui broke into laughter after, but he was obviously joking. Let them come. I said and he nodded, but patted my shoulder. I'm sure it'll be fine. But this is really something. I feel like an eruption is happening. Hee hee. I just laughed at his move usage. Well then. Break for tomorrow? If tomorrow works, that's perfect. I'll catch another. Well, maybe a couple Executor for tomorrow. They're pretty laid back, so it's not a huge deal. Great. Then I'm out of here. Have a nice night, Professor Kukui. You too, Vicky. Make sure you don't sleep talk. I snickered as I headed out of the room and then into as fast a stroll as I could with my flip-flops. That was a whole lot of interesting stuff. TMs weren't perfect, and it might limit Pokemon's control over the learned move. It made me think of the TMs I'd used on my team and there was regret, but also I had needed them at the time. I'd just be real careful in the future if I ever used a TM again. Blue Heart might never become the true electric flying/water type of his dreams if that was the case. Thunder might be locked in and set in his brain without any real control over it. I shook off those thoughts and instead enjoyed the setting Alolan sun as I headed back to the beach. I bet Mama and Papa were getting hungry and I could definitely eat. The setting sun made a great backdrop as all of us were eating out on a terrace outside an Alolan restaurant. Food piled high, and all of us were digging in as everyone looked warm and happy. Remembering it was the middle of winter in Kanto made the warm sunset all the better. Not that I hated the cold exactly, but sometimes you just wanted to be warm. So your research didn't go well? Well, when it comes to research, a failure is actually good too. It means you learned something you didn't know. If the results play out and TMs actually stop a Pokémon from being able to adjust a move, or learn variances in a move, it could do some interesting things to the TM business. I added as I bit into a warm honey bun. Yummy, huh? That's kinda crazy to think about. That you helped discover this. Papa offered with a proud look. That's just how research is. I did something that most people don't think about, and now we're testing it and seeing what the results are. I shrugged, it wasn't that big a deal. Learning that TMs might limit a Pokémon's advancement with that move wasn't a huge deal. Most trainers would still just use the TM as it's faster, and they might not need or want to modify a move. I mean, if I needed to teach a Pokémon a rare coverage move, then a TM might work fine. But it also might add a lot of value to move trainers. People that could train a Pokémon in a move might become more valuable again. That entire business had crashed pretty heavily, with TM becoming mainstream. In the end, it was what it was. I shrugged it all off, and instead focused on my Pokémon. Everyone was eating, and I noticed Gibble was actually quite active right now, grabbing some of the food on the plate in front of her and just stuffing it into her mouth. She must be hungry after all that swimming. That was the most exercise I'd ever really given her. Heck, it might be the most exercise she ever received, considering the crush style that the Garchomp used. Huh. Maybe it was time to get Gibble more active? Maybe that was one of the reasons her development had been a bit slow? Well, I'd have to call home and talk to Blissey about it. She'd have an exercise plan ready for Gibble once we got home. So, do I want to ask? I pointedly asked, and Papa and Mama both looked away from me as if nothing weird was happening. Lucario. Lucario cut in tittering, and Papa and Mama both sent her betrayed looks. I couldn't help but grin as I watched the two random Pokémon both continue to hover around my parents. A Meowth was sunning itself on the railing nearby, constantly showing off its fur and as if begging to be pet. But he only had eyes for Mama. And the puppy that was making eyes at Papa, sitting just off the porch with its chin on the wood, was a Rockruff. We came across the Rockruff? Papa said, looking at me. That's right. I confirmed for Papa as he nodded. Chasing the weird Meowth. Meow. Meowth muttered darkly under its breath as it glared at Papa. It's just a Meowth, Papa. Alolan Meowth changed into a regional variant. Like how the Ferrous clan used to have Galarian Meowths. That information had Papa perk up a bit as he looked at the Meowth in a new light. It's a dark type, due to it being pampered by royalty. I explained, and Meowth purred loud enough as it stretched and kept sending Mama pet me eyes. That explains a lot. Papa muttered, and then I looked to the Rockruff that was still giving big begging eyes up at Papa. That's a Rockruff, a rock type, also called the puppy Pokémon like Growlithe. It's neat, because it actually is kinda like an EV, it has different evolution variants. Wait, really? Papa perked up and the puppy's tail started wagging. Yep. Although they're all still rock types. It depends on what time of day it is when they evolve, and what the Rockruff's ability is. Correct. A new voice called out cheerfully, and I looked behind me to see Alola Kahuna Olivia. I greeted her politely, and the beautiful woman gave me a warm smile. Alola Victoria Ferrous. I heard our Kukui snatched you up today? Well, we worked together. It was fun. Good. I'd hate for your vacation to become nothing but a working holiday. Greetings to you as well. It was. Victor, and Haruka? That's right. Papa said. And your Lucario, what a delightful sight you are. Olivia offered with a smile, and Lucario took a second, probably testing her aura, but sent her a smile and a nod back. That's a relief. If Lucario wasn't wary, it meant Olivia wasn't here to cause trouble. I apologize for interrupting your dinner, but well. I was going to wait, but I noticed you have a few watchers, and I heard you discussing Rockruff. Ruff. The pup spoke up then in excitement before settling back down as if it didn't want anyone to know it was there. Yeah, we caught these two chasing each other earlier. I rescued the Meowth and they've both been following us around ever since. Mama explained, trying to downplay it. Haha. Well, a spirited Rockruff does tend to chase people that interest in. She explained, but she looked at me, and I realized that there was more to her showing up than just a random chance. Hala told me about you earning the Commonium Z. Yeah. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. The Z crystal shone from the evening sun as Olivia looked down at it. It's a bit out there to think there's a whole group of Komo just out there. She muttered quietly to herself. They're doing pretty well. I offered, and she hummed at that. Hala told me you know what that is, what it means. It's a Z crystal. Proof that I completed an island challenge. At least that's how they're treated on Alola. Exactly right. She snapped her finger and pointed at me. We sometimes let outsiders take part in the island challenge. Usually only those that moved here, but you. You completed one before ever stepping foot on Alola. It's an interesting situation that none of us Kahuna quite know what to do with. Oh. Well, I don't know if you really need to do anything. Heh. That's true. We could just bury our heads in the sand and forget all about it. She looked at me, her eyes glinting with something. But where's the fun in that? I'm glad we had this short time to talk, but I do have to get running. Alola, Miss Ferrous. Alola, Kahuna Olivia. The woman sauntered away, her body shahaying left and right and drawing eyes all down the road. What did that last part mean? Papa asked, a bit suspicious, but I just shrugged. We'll either find out, or we won't. No point worrying about it. I turned back to the meal and continued eating. The Kahuna were definitely up to something, but other than maybe Nanu, they were good people. Although Papa and Mama were still worried about what Olivia had wanted. It didn't change that as the sun dipped down our energy was running out and all of us headed back to the hotel. The Meowth and Rockruff both trailing us, but kept their distance for now. Although Papa had definitely been throwing food to the Rockruff. Papa was gonna get in trouble when he inevitably wanted to take it home with him. We entered the hotel, and I watched as Papa's head shifted to behind us, where the Rockruff was giving the biggest puppy dog eyes through the glass, practically whimpering and teary-eyed. Come on. Mama demanded, grabbing his arm and tugging him towards the elevator. Although I noticed a certain Meowth sitting on the walls around the hotel, its eyes glowing in the moonlight as it watched. Sigh. I already knew what was going to happen. I split off from my parents when we hit the hotel rooms, and I lazily walked inside before taking a moment to flop onto the soft bed. A moment of quiet, before I sat up and started releasing my team, watching as they all looked around their new environment. Alright everyone, we all need to wash off the sand before bed. So come on. I opened the bathroom door and started the shower. Jang. Jang. Yes, even you. I assured him as I could already see plenty of dried sand sticking in between his scales. I'll dry you off after, I promise. I told him, and he puffed up, but followed me inside. There, I walked into the standing shower and took a moment to wash the salt water out of my own hair, before looking at my team. Dratini already was in the shower with me, he liked the water, and he giggled when the stream hit him. Jangmo fought me, but I scrubbed him clean with a washcloth and then wrapped him up in a big fluffy towel, turning it into a burrow. That settled him right down. Mimikyu was using the sink washing his disguise himself. Brave didn't mind, although she'd avoided all the sand to start with, but she was happily enjoying the humidity of the shower. But then I brought in Gibble. She looked up at me, as I carried her over, and let her reach out and touch the water so it wouldn't startle her, and then I settled her inside the stream. Gib? She seemed to question as she looked up and then her mouth opened. And just stayed open. Gibble? I leaned down to check and yep. She was just swallowing the water as it streamed into her mouth. Not exactly how you use a shower, Gibble Gable. I told her, As I grabbed the washcloth and stroked at her scales, the light salt residue and sand here and there came away with gentle strokes, and other than making sure she wasn't going to make herself sick by just constantly drinking water, she seemed quite happy with the shower. Riolu was the longest, but she had the most fur as well. Thankfully, she also needed the least help. Other than an eye on her to make sure she actually washed up properly. Once everyone was dried off, or in Brave's case, quite pleased with still being damp, I settled everyone around the room. Brave got the coffee table where a bit of water was poured into a bowl, and she was very happy to settle into it for the night to sleep. Mimikyu of course joined me as a cuddle plush. Dratini was also gonna wrap around me in his sleep, the cuddle noodle. Gibble I set up in the chair, with plenty of blankets giving her a little burrow, and almost before I moved away, she was snoring. Jangmo slipped under the bed with a pillow, and his happy chirp like barks meant he was already dreaming. And Riolu got the other chair curling up with a towel and snoozing off. I looked around the room, good everyone was settled. I turned off the lights and instead of slipping into bed I pulled on my flip-flops and headed downstairs. I already knew what I'd find. The elevator opened and I walked across the lobby to the entrance, and then looked through the glass as Papa was already down here, a bowl full of berries and things set out before Rockruff, as Papa pet the puppy. His eyes lit up and his smile wide as his fingers ran through the pup's coat. Predictable, he said he was going to check on you. Mama said suddenly appearing at my side, and I nodded at her. Yep, you're both totally predictable. I told her, pointedly as I looked behind her back where she had been trying to hide the tin of cat food. I don't know what you're talking about. She said lying terribly as she did. Night. I called out, turning to head back up to the room. Rio Rio Rio. A certain hyena's laugh woke me up as I pulled the blanket away from my face as I saw Riolu bouncing at the foot of the bed, controller in her paw, laughing at an angry Jangmo who was down on the floor. What are you doing? Riolu. Lu. She proclaimed, hand still raised to the sky with the TV controller. I looked at the TV and still had no idea what that was, but it was cartoons. Maybe. Stop teasing Jangmo, share the TV. I told her and tried to roll back over, but Riolu the little brat of course started bouncing more on the bed. War declared. I grabbed a pillow and chucked it, smacking her right in the back and knocking her off balance mid-leap. She went tumbling and I heard her yelp a bit as she hit the carpet. She'd be fine. But then she shrieked as she was within Jangmo range. Heh, don't tease the others, or they might get revenge. I called out, laying back and staring at the ceiling. I was gonna have to get up. No way I was getting back to sleep now. Grumbling, I rose and headed to the bathroom, ignoring how Riolu was struggling to keep Jangmo from biting her face off as they tumbled around on the floor. Mimikyu I realized was attached to my shoulder as I hit the bathroom, and I smiled at him sleepily in the mirror as I ran a hand through my hair. Yep. It was a total mess. I hadn't dried it off properly last night before bed. Considering I was going back into the ocean shortly, I set Mimikyu on the counter, and just stuffed my head into the shower and turned it on. Wincing at the cold, I pulled my now damp hair and combed it enough to not look terrible and toweled it off for now. Taking the time to brush my teeth, I poked my head out. Rioilu teeth brush. I barked at her, mouth full of toothpaste, and suddenly the fight between Jangmo and her ended as she hopped up and grumbled as she entered the bathroom. Watching her get her own toothbrush and start brushing had me nod, and we soon finished that task for the morning. I'm thinking ocean again? Or dude dash. Gib. You want to see what else the island has to offer? Well, I guess that answers that. I looked towards the nest of blankets that Gibble was still inside, but her eyes were shining and her little claws were grasping. Well, ocean it is then. After another morning swim with Gibble, which tired her out, I settled into the sand once more next to where Mama and Papa were sitting. Of course they both had new guests. Meowth wasn't even trying to hide it as the cat Pokémon settled on Mama's lap and was purring lightly, which would get louder if Mama stopped petting him. What a demanding little Pokémon. Rockruff was playing with Papa. Papa had found a frisbee, and was throwing it between Riolu, Lucario, and Rockruff. The four of them having just a crazy good time running around in the sand. You're both so predictable. I muttered at Mama as I watched. I don't know what you mean, dear, but little Meow's here, the poor girl has an injured paw. I'm going to take her to the Pokémon Center later, and have the nurse Joyce check her out. Find out if she's already a captured Pokémon. To help make sure she gets back to her owners. You're not even trying to hide the lies. I told her without mercy, but Mama just smirked as she continued to pet the newly named Meows, who was just looking at me with a smug grin as she was pet. Mama had named her. She was definitely going to try and come with us. Ugh. Considering how many Pokémon in Alola I'd love to make friends with, I expected that I would be the issue when it came time to leave, but no, of course not. It was my parents. I was too busy playing with my friends to make lots of new friends, but my parents were snatching up Pokémon left and right. Of course, the peaceful morning was cut short as a familiar face approached. Alola. Kahuna Hala called out, interrupting, and Papa instantly realized who it was, looking a little bashful as Rockruff started jumping at Papa's leg to get at the frisbee, demanding more. Alola Kahuna. Mama greeted, doing her best to pretend everything was fine, and she wasn't petting a purring Meowth. Alola. I called as well, grinning, because this situation was hilarious. I was hoping I might speak to young Victoria for a moment. Sure. I rose up and brushed off the sand from my swimsuit. How can I help? That is the question, isn't it? I have come to offer you an island challenge. Chapter 100. An island challenge? Papa asked, looking between me and Hala, confused. I accept. I said before anything else could be stated, because this was the entire reason I was here. Well, that and the beaches. Hala smiled at me, but looked at Papa. Unlike the mainland, we on Alola don't have a league or a gyms. We instead hold island trials. Tasks that our young ones complete to learn about our home. Your daughter has already completed one before ever stepping foot on Alola. This is a unique situation as we do not often offer them to outsiders. Because of this, there has been some discussion about what to do. Now the Kahuna have convened and our discussion is complete. And what did you all decide? Mama asked, her eyes sharp. She'd even stopped petting Meowth, who was now watching everything with an irritated look. The decision was that since Victoria has completed a challenge, she would get the chance to take part in a challenge, and if she succeeds, well, she would be considered an island challenger. If I succeed, will you give me a Z ring? I asked, holding up my Commonium Z in front of my face, the gem sparkling in the noonday sun. I promised Kamoo I would learn to use the Z move with Jangmo. Hala looked a bit surprised, before smirking. It seems you know even more than I expected. Yes. If you complete this task. And from his sleeve he pulled it out. A Z ring. This will be yours. Then I accept. No matter the challenge. I'll do it. I said, determination flowing through me. I won't fail. Not here. We shall see. Is it dangerous? Vicky. You don't have your team. Papa said, and I shook my head, at the same time as Hala. Island trials aren't just battles. Hala offered, but I added to it. That's the trick, Papa. The island trials are about learning, gaining an understanding of the island and the Pokémon around it. It's not about battles. In fact, I don't think I'll need to do much battling at all. I offered, and Hala looked at me, and smiled. Did Professor Kukui tell you about the island challenges? Or someone else? He wondered. Nope. I've just been listening. I told him, and he looked pleased at my response. It is as Victoria says. Battle is not the answer to the island trial, although perhaps she will face a grand trial after? That's when I face a Kahuna in battle, right? I'd love to. Then the island trial begins. Come, I'll show you your task. Yes, Kahuna Hala. I'll be back. I called to Mama and Papa, both looked hesitant to let me go, but I was already jogging to keep up with Hala. Time for something interesting. We walked for a while. Hala, thankfully, wasn't quiet the whole time, instead pointing things out and chatting about random stuff. That shop was good for this. That little grove is where the children played with wild Pokémon. Just neat island trivia. Then we walked down an old dirt path, and the sounds of Pokémon in the trees became more and more common, until suddenly it wasn't. The jungle went quiet. I looked at Hala, but he looked grim. "This is where your challenge begins," he said just as we rounded a bend, and a teenager was resting against a tree up ahead. He was pretty. He had that air about him. Slightly pink hair, very straight-laced, feeling pretty boy. "Alola, Kahuna." He pushed off the tree and greeted us as we approached. "Alola Alima. Is the area still secure?" "It is. I've got my Pokémon keeping everything away." "Is this really needed?" "I could handle this." "Perhaps, but it is safer this way." Victoria. Recently, a Pokémon has come down not far from here. He is normally well known as a forest guardian. A safe Pokémon for anyone that he meets. He is rampaging, battling any Pokémon nearby. This is one of the largest berry orchards on the island. He is stopping any Pokémon from entering. Many Pokémon are having trouble finding food. "Oh no," I whispered, "that could cause a lot of knock-on effects." Starving Pokémon stopped caring about things like humans when they started getting really hungry. Starving Pokémon went for food, and humans had a lot of it. There could be a rampage, or worse. Massive migrations that shifted the entire ecosystem. Your task is to find out how to resolve this problem. Kahuna, I protest. Alima said, looking from Hala to me. He didn't glare, and even looked a little apologetic, but he continued. "This is a serious issue. I don't know if trusting a foreigner is dash." Alima. "I understand your concern, but Victoria needs a trial, and the Kahuna have agreed. Besides, she will be safer doing this task than you." The pretty boy looked away but didn't argue anything further. Then Victoria. "Know that island challenges are not battles." To my surprise, Hala put a hand on my shoulder. "Go use your experience to help heal the island." "I will, Kahuna." I started forward, although I noticed Hala did follow, but far behind. Watching but not interfering. I came down the little dirt path into a sort of dip. The grass was tall and fluffy as I stepped down, and I think there might be a small swamp here, feeding the many trees in this section of the jungle. The whole place was humid, but nice. A breeze blew among the trees, keeping it from being too much. As soon as I stepped down, I heard it. The grumble and the sound of tearing at food. Was it a Pokémon that was starving? I pushed onward. I crept along quietly, using the trees as cover, and noticed Hala was standing up just before the dip, settled among the bushes with a few branches held over his head. It actually worked pretty well to hide him, even if it looked silly. Drrrr. A growl broke out and I felt it. A prickle in the air, a scent that I recognized, and I ducked. In the air. Too far upwards to have hit me even so, a beam of energy arced out and burned through the air with sickly power. Dragon Pulse. Ah, no wonder they'd given me this task. I looked up. Draoa. The Pokémon roared as it had definitely noticed me. I rose up enough to see. Drampa? I questioned why was probably the most gentle of dragon types down here acting like this. He saw me, and I saw him, but I took it all in. His fur around his wings was matted. His hair looked messy, and his eyes. They weren't normal, but shimmering with angry red energy. He shook his head as he saw me, and yet, started charging another Dragon Pulse. I could hear Hala, and maybe Alima behind me make some noise, an aborted warning, but I was focused. This was wrong. Drampa didn't act like this. They loved children, enough that the Pokédex noted they'd go destroy the houses of bullies that were mean to the children they liked. I traced the angle of his neck, where his eyes glared, and didn't move, as he blasted another Dragon Pulse. It went well wild, doing nothing but fluttering my hair as I watched. He tried to stop himself, but couldn't. He didn't want to hurt me. Well, that was something I could deal with. I stepped back, hands raised, and he seemed to fight with himself, but didn't attack me again. What was going on? I took it all in, piles of food, eaten up and discarded in a mess. Messy eating? Why? Lots of chesto, and roast, and a spear berries with a bite or two but also crushed around the floor. Why eat those? Why not finish them? I quickly did a side roll as another dragon pulse shot towards me. It still wasn't close, but it had been closer. What was going on? Something super weird for sure. Didn't Drampa prefer Habenberry? Why eat all of? I stepped into a berry. A rost. Bending down, doing my best to keep an eye on Drampa as he seemed to growl and stomp the floor around him while keeping an eye on me. His rage was, the berry hadn't been eaten. He bit into it and spit it out, or just tore it apart. Why? I looked up. The trees were all sorts. I knew that because I was the daughter of a berry farmer. I could see the trees with the different types all around, but there were a lot of orange berries, but every berry on them had been eaten. Not a single sign of them left. Injury? Orange berries tended to restore health to Pokémon. Was Drampa injured? Well, actually that made sense. Berserk. Drampa's ability activated at half health. It made their special attacks stronger. I once more shifted, watching as a sickly aura dragon pulse was shot out, a faint explosion behind me telling me it hit the earth. The strange aura around his eyes was probably the tell sign for berserk. So we had a berserk Drampa that couldn't stop berserking? Why? He didn't look injured. No blood or anything like that. He looked messy. Like he hadn't been taking care of himself. I wish I had my backpack. I'd give him some orin and see if I couldn't figure it out from there. I got up and started moving. Another dragon pulse warning was shot off, but I ignored it as I hurried along. He wasn't going to hit me. Whatever was wrong with him, he was still in control enough that he wasn't going to attack a child. I searched around the area I needed. An orange berry among some tree roots. I snatched it up and hurried back. Once more I heard his growl as he sensed me approaching. This time I ducked down and scrambled forward even after he attacked, and then chucked the berry. He flinched in anger at the object and almost obliterated the berry, but he had just fired a pulse, and a moment later he scooped up the orin and devoured the whole thing practically whole. I noticed a tension in his shoulders loosen for a moment, before spiking back up. What the hell? So that was the issue. His berserk just wasn't stopping. I winced as another dragon pulse ripped through the area. If this kept up, this challenge wasn't going to matter because he'd have destroyed all the trees. Okay, so what? His eyes. I looked up and his red eyes stared back at me. The aura that was exuding off him from his berserk. His eyes weren't red. They were purple. A sign of poisoning in Pokémon. Poison. I whispered as the realization struck me. The reason he was freaking out. He wasn't hungry, he was poisoned. My head shot up to trees. Nothing. Not a single pecha tree. I turned and hurried back, ignoring the sounds of rampaging behind me. Alola. I greeted Hala as I jogged right past him, and then up the little path before finding the one I was looking for. Alola. You have antidote and potions on you? I'll pay. I asked the older boy, and then shrugged, 'cause why not? Or some pecha and oranberry, I guess. He looked at me, snapping shut his little booklet. He looked irritated, but he nodded, reaching into his bag and rooting around for a second to pull out an antidote bottle and a potion bottle. You think it's poison? I know it is. That's why he's eating every oranberry he can find, but just smashing out the rest of them. He's berserking really hard because he keeps healing and then getting hurt again. I explained, and Elima blinked in surprise, before making an understanding sound. Alright, I'm off. Alola. I jogged back with my hands full of medical supplies. I went right past Hala, who'd almost stepped completely out of the bush he'd been hiding in, but sunk back down when I came jogging back down the trail and sliding into the little berry orchard. Time to get to work. I could call out some Pokémon. Dragon Pulse could be dealt with even with my baby team, but I had something to prove. Just because I was from Kanto didn't mean I solved all my problems with overwhelming power. I'm a dragon master, dealing with a berserking dragon. This was all going to just be a Tuesday for me. That's what I needed to convey. That I was totally in tune with the world around me, and I could totally be trusted with overwhelming power and no oversight. Time to fix me a dragon. I slipped out of my flip-flops, did a bit of stretching and held potion and antidote in each hand. Then I broke out into a sprint straight at the rampaging, furiously powerful dragon. He noticed me and once more sent a warning shot that went wide, but I didn't slow, and by the time the beam of power finished and Drampa could see again, I was already much closer than he expected. I saw it. Felt it in my bones. The energy gathered up. The way his eyes focused on me in rage. The shape of his neck showing where he was going to spit it. Right at me. I'd surprised a berserking Pokémon. Not usually a good idea, and it was lashing out. I ran forward, watching the energy form, coalescing together. It took shape as I darted, and I waited. I dove forward, sliding my belly down on the grass as the dragon pulse shot out over my head. It also obscured Drampa's vision. I scrambled up enough to get the final few feet scrambling as the energy felt like it gave me a bit of light burn. It'd be fine. Dragon energy tingled like that. I popped the caps of the medicine, no time for the spray stuff, and as the energy dissipated I flicked the bottle so potion and antidote both went streaming into his open mouth. The liquid hit the back of his throat and he swallowed instinctively. He jerked as the medicine, while better tasting, was still not the best flavor, and sort of shivered as it went down. I could see it working. His breathing evened out and his body untensed. I even watched as the energy flowing off his eyes, that indicated his berserk state, dissipated. He relaxed, slumping almost entirely forward, before his eyes shot open and he looked around until his eyes locked on me. Drampa. He cried out as actual tears shot out of his eyes as he slammed into me, his little claw wings grasping me all over as I realized he was searching for injuries. I'm fine. I'm fine. I yelled out, assuring him as I let him shift me around to check. Then I had his whole head slamming into me and crying onto me. Ah. I hugged him back as he clutched onto me, obviously still quite upset. It's okay. It's all taken care of now. Everything's okay. I told him as he hugged me, and Drampa would probably give good hugs if he wasn't sort of a mess. I relaxed and just hugged him back, letting the poor thing let it all out. What a mess. Poisoned and then berserking because your body felt like it was injured, and then eating berries only to not have any pecha berries, so you berserk again. And again. Drampa. He called out, pulling away and once more checking me for injuries. No, I'm fine. You missed me every time. You made sure you couldn't hit me. I was so happy that you weren't trying to hurt me. I told him, and that only made him cry again. Heavy footsteps behind me had Drampa tense up, but he relaxed as he saw Hala. Alola, Grandpa Forest. Hala greeted gently, and there was a moment. Drampa was pretty old. I could tell just by how his scales looked, so. I wonder if Hala once played with this Drampa as a little kid. You had us all worried. Drampa, he trailed off and I noticed it. He sounded embarrassed, but that wasn't. I reached up and grabbed his head and forced him to look at me. Stupid Vicky. Real stupid. I told myself, as I stood up. I hadn't actually checked. You're still poisoned. I warned both of them as I noticed the purple in Drampa's eyes growing again. How are you still poisoned? I gave you a ton of antidote. Dramp? He pulled his head away and looked backwards like he was embarrassed. No, I walked around him and he pulled up his wings and I could see the problem. I sat down and gently ran my hands through his feathers and found them. This is gonna sting. I warned him as I yanked. Draw. He yelled a bit and I found myself holding. Okay, I'll be honest, I don't recognize the stinger. I mentioned, looking to Hala. Toxapex. Hala said after examining it for a moment. Check for more. There is often more than one stinger. Right. I started searching around, and found another, and another, and another. Did you sit on a Toxapex? I asked him, a little awed at how many of the stingers I was pulling out of his butt. Drampa, he offered, hiding his head in his wing. Well. I shook it off. Take some more antidote, and let's get you sorted out. I looked at the pile of Toxapex spines I'd pulled out of Dramp's butt. He'd definitely not had a good time. Poor old man. He whined and cried at me every time I pulled one, like he wasn't probably one of the strongest wild Pokémon around. I just patted him on the head as I searched for more and more. If Blissey was here, this would have been a quick thing to fix. Okay, I think I got all of them. I told all 3 men. Alima had joined us eventually and had offered me another potion, an antidote bottle, so I could spray down the puncture wounds. Drampa. The dragon cheered and rubbed against me in a big hug. You're welcome. But let's avoid the Toxapex, okay? Or come find help if you get stung again. I said a little sternly, and the dragon's head bobbed up and down rapidly. Then, as Kahuna of Melee, I find this island trial complete. Hala finally rumbled out and Drampa looked up alongside me. I rose up and faced the older man. Hala's face broke into a gentle smile. Bravery. Wisdom. Kindness. You faced down a rampaging dragon, not as a foe, but as a friend. One you've never met. You discovered his woe and rectified it. Putting yourself at risk to do so. And, you did it alone, you never released your Pokémon. They would have just angered Drampa. It was safer without them. Yes, it was the wise choice. I see now that the Como off the island were wise to entrust both their future and their hope to you. Hala pulled it out. The Z-ring. Take this. Tomorrow you will face me in a grand trial. I will dash. He had placed the Z-ring into my hands, and I stared down at it. Cool to the touch, not heavy, but not light. Just heavy enough to remind you that it's there. That you hold so much power at your wrist. As Hala reached into his pocket, I caught the glint of AZ crystal, but... Drampa. Suddenly, Drampa shuffled into his feathers and then dropped AZ crystal into my palm. Dragonium Z. I gasped out as I realized I was bouncing and shaking and practically squealing. Dragon Z move. Dragon Z move. Drampa. I cried out in tears and leapt at the Pokémon wrapping around his neck in a big hug. Dra. Drampa. He chuckled at me as he accepted my hug. Ah. I heard Hala say almost forlornly. I was going to give you this Normalium Z. That's great too. I cheered, but no way was I using a Normalium Z when I had Dragonium. Wahahaha. I cackled wildly as I thrust my 2 fists into the sky, still half-hugging Drampa. Dragon power. I was practically vibrating as we all headed out of the jungle. Drampa was coming with us. To stop at the Pokémon Center for a checkup, but I could barely tear my eyes away from it. Dragonium Z. Sure, Commonium Z was cooler, but I couldn't use that until Jangmo evolved. This? Everyone but Riolu could use it. And Hala had given me the Normalium Z as well. So Riolu could use a Z move too. But let's be honest. Devastating Drake was going to be flying soon. I suppose, I should say. Congratulations. Alima said as we finally made it through the jungle. He was looking at me, and his previous difficult look was gone. You proved you're worthy of it. Maybe I'll see you again. Alola. Alola. I cheered as he and Drampa headed off to the Pokémon Center. Drampa looked backwards, which I waved at him happily so he'd keep going and get himself checked out. I ask that you be careful with using any Z move. Hala began quietly. As we watched Drampa and Alima walk away. They're given to us to protect Alola, to protect our family and home. I looked up at the Kahuna and gave him my most determined face. I won't abuse them. I promise. I'll use them with all the respect they deserve. Z moves are the bond between trainer and Pokémon. Our strength, together. Yes. Exactly right. Hala said, looking very pleased. I'd suggest practicing it lightly tonight, if you want to use it for the grand trial. I will leave you here. Alola Victoria Ferrous, and be welcome here. I blinked at the depth of what he just said and nodded, bowing a bit. Thank you Kahuna Hala. He walked off and then I turned and rushed as fast as I could with flop-flops to the beach. I had to try it and I wanted to show everyone. Z-ring on my hand, I was still practically buzzing in excitement. This was it. A Z move. One of the cool gimmicks of Pokémon. I mean, it wasn't Mega Evolving, which was pure Bond, Trainer, and Pokémon empowering awesomeness. And way cooler, but Z moves were easily number 2 on the coolness factor. And I had the Dragonium Z. I made it to the beach, out of breath and toes a little scraped from running in flip-flops, because I could resist, but there was Mama and Papa. I did it. I called out as I skidded in the sand before them. Whoa, trouble. Papa called out as he took in my appearance. You did the trial thing? Yes. Well, I'm going to have a grand trial tomorrow with Hala, that's like a gym challenge. I'll fight Hala. But. I held up my wrist, showing my Z-ring. The bracelet was beautiful, just the right weight on my wrist, and it practically sparkled in the sunlight. It was going to be awesome. Lance was going to lose his shit. That's nice? Papa asked looking to Mama, and she looked confused too. It's pretty? It's a Z-ring. I said and again, just blank looks. Okay, I'll make you understand. I grumbled a bit and walked down the beach. Just stay right there and watch. It's amazing. I yelled out, pointing at them. Now. Who do I do this with? Dratini? We definitely had one of the strongest bonds, but I fingered Jmo's ball. It would mean something to him more than the others. I hit the trigger. Jmo popped out barking happily and then stilling as I kneeled down and showed him the Z-ring. Jmo. Jang. He looked from the ring to me, up and down. Yeah. It's a Z-ring. I finished the trial and the kahuna gave it to me. So now, I showed him the Z crystals that were locked into the side of the band. First the Commonium Z, we can't use this yet. I shifted, showing him Dragonium Z. I pulled it out and inserted it into the top, but this one we can. Are you ready for some training? We need to sync our moves. Jang. He barked and I nodded before stopping. I released everyone quickly, Riola running to say hello to Lucario before wondering what was happening, and I looked over my team. Okay everyone. I need you to learn what I'm teaching Jangmo, then you can do it too. But this is to show everyone. I called out and Dratini looked interested along with Brave. Gibble, it's not swim time cutie. I told her as she started seemingly quite happily toddling off towards the water. Can you keep an eye on her Dratini? Teeny. He confirmed, coiling around her a bit hesitantly at first, but she didn't bite and instead, since she couldn't move, just plopped down and rubbed her hands in the sand. Right. Jangmo. Here are the moves. I raised my hands up over my head, crossed. And then brought them wide. Double punch forward with wrists crossed. I felt it then already building up, despite not even activating the ring and crystal. Bring hands back into almost a Kamehameha, but then thrust forward fingers like dragon's fangs and bring it open into a massive maw. Then power stance to let the power release. I was practically gasping just doing the moves. I could feel something rising up in me, but it dissipated since it wasn't in sync. Let's practice together. I told Jangmo, who barked and turned away from me facing the ocean. Wide power, double punch, dragon maw, power stance. Again. Wide power, double punch, dragon maw, power stance. Okay, we're close. Breath together. Wide power, double punch, dragon maw, power stance. Okay. I fixed my body and brought up the Z-ring and flipped it. Instantly, it burst into light and I could feel it. I could also hear Mama and Papa gasp, but I brought it up, and then, wide power, the light flowed through me, rising up. Double punch. Our connection locked in. Dragon Maw. We weren't just people. We were dragons. Competition and force was in our blood. Power stance. The power flowed through me, bursting into an aura around us both, flowing into Jangmo. His stances were perfect. Of course they were, He'd probably practiced the Commonium Z stance under his elders since he was born. And then, devastating. Drake! I roared. The purple energy around him rose up, he opened his maw, pink energy formed, coalescing, I could feel him struggle, and then I was helping our shared connection, both controlling the move. It finished, gathered the energy together and then burst forth in the shape of a flying dragon. It flapped, shifting left and right under our control as it burst away. Together! I called out, feeling the connection and trying to guide it towards the ocean. Jong! Our move shifted, flowed, and smashed into a wave. The explosion blew sand and water onto me even from so far away. Jangmo nearly tilted over entirely, but managed to plant his feet. Yeah! I cried out, jumping into the air, and then fell face first onto the sand, all the energy in my body leaving me in a rush. Vicky!